Welcome to the Ultimate Batman Arkham Knight Supercut Retrospective. This video is the culmination of the first 6 months of this channel's very existence, where I set out on a mission to cover every piece of playable content in Batman Arkham Knight, aside from the challenge maps because, well, they're challenge maps. This video has been lovingly stitched together, recut, re-edited, and made into one fluid piece of content for you to enjoy, or probably sleep through. It covers the main game, each and every side mission, and every single piece of the post-launch content. This will also act as my second to last Arkham review style video. That's not to say there'll be no more Arkham content, because there will, but as the channel grows, the content needs to as well, so after this there's one more grand hurrah to put a full stop on my Arkham review content, and then a new era begins. An era full of different games, topics, and heroes to talk about. One I'm more than excited to get underway. So, thank you so much for your support over the last 6 months. Thank you for watching, and I really hope you enjoy this. Subscribe, like, and well, let's get into Batman Arkham Knight.
So, look who's laughing now, remembering Arkham City.
Batman Arkham Knight is the best Batman Arkham game. Just think about it for a second before you get angry. Alright, have you thought about it? Right, good. So, I'm not just saying this for some cheap shock factor to start the video, or even laughs, because I'm sure some of you will think that's the funniest joke you've heard all day. No, I genuinely believe this, and I have done for a long time. It's my personal favourite Batman game in the franchise, and honestly, how could it not be? The game is the best Batman simulator ever put to screen, but for some reason, it gets no respect. It never gets its real flowers for the innovative changes or the advancements in mechanics. So, let me take you on a journey through one of the best and most disrespected superhero games of all time. A game full of controversy, but equally full of everything that fans came to love from arguably the most iconic superhero video game franchise of all time. This is how it happened. This is how Arkham Knight died. Well, not quite. I think it's still pretty much alive. It's more alive than Suicide Squad. Before we get into this, this is the bit where I tell you that you should subscribe and all that. 97% of you want to subscribe, blah blah blah. Thank you for all the support on the recent videos. They've been doing really well, and it means a lot. So yes, thank you for that. Let's get into Batman Arkham Knight. Let me take you back to the summer of 2009. Superhero games were on the decline. Video game tie-ins ran rampant. The world looked for a hero, and only one man could save it. Batman. Arkham Asylum. Arkham Asylum took the world by storm, a true lightning-in-a-bottle moment. Developers Rocksteady Studios had initially set out to make a rhythm-based combat game, and had finished by making a definitive piece of media history. The atmosphere, fantastic. The combat, fluid. The characters, faithful. The story, fabulous. The architecture, freaky. Arkham Asylum was the best superhero game ever made. Batman was back with a bang, in a No Man's Land meets Serious House, Serious Earth storyline, with revolutionary combat, gorgeous graphics, in a nasty sort of way, and with enough fan service and lore for even the most hardcore Bat fan. And arguably the best menu screen ever. Rocksteady got the Bat back to the top of the mountain, and now it was time to do it again. Now, I've got a riddle for you. What do you get when you mix Escape from New York, Batman, and a bad blood transfusion? Batman Arkham City. They did it again. Those rascals at Rocksteady went and did it again. Arkham City took what made Arkham Asylum the GOAT and just added more horns, more maps, more characters, more moves, more depth, more Catwoman, more icons of the Batman world, and most importantly, more walls. Arkham City was bigger. The Batman game to end all Batman games. If Arkham Asylum was Jordan, then City was LeBron. Arkham City blew the gaming world away and cemented Rocksteady atop the development mountain. 2 out of 2 games themed around the titular Dark Knight, and they were rising. Everyone wondered, where would they go now? The future. Batman Beyond, perhaps? Would other heroes get the Rocksteady treatment? Well, not quite, but you know where this is going. Bigger, badder, and with more polygons than ever before, Rocksteady knew what they had to do. They needed to become something more, something darker. Combat had been perfected, Free Flow Mark III had been born, and with it came more fluidity than ever. Finally, the bat had become the ball, bouncing around the room, hitting everything in sight. Movement was quicker, the graphics were perfected, and finally, after the near 6 years of waiting, players got to quench their insatiable appetite for speed. Enter the Batmobile. An iconic staple of the Dark Knight's arsenal. The rockets, the wings, the roar, it was all here. A strange design, but a striking one. We can talk more about this later, but all we need to know is that so far, Arkham Knight was there, and it was beautiful. So, where do we start with Arkham Knight? Everyone knows how grand and amazing the Arkham games are. But where do we start with what I'm trying to convince you is the best one? Better than Arkham City, better than Arkham Asylum. Well, I think we should start with the story. A controversial side of the Dark Knight's fourth outing in the Arkhamverse, where the highs are as high as they can be, and the lows are genuinely kind of baffling. So, in the style of my previous retrospective on Spider-Man 2 for the PS5, I'm not going to be going through the whole story, because A, not all of it's bad. B, I'm going to assume since you're watching this, you have a brief or full understanding of the Arkham Knight story. So, let's start with the opening. It is perfect. If there's three things I love in life, it's Frank Sinatra, the Joker, and cremations. And this opening combines all three, and I love it. The close-ups of the metal turning as Joker is burned and finally put to a permanent end, as the cutscene transitions into the now famous "This is how it happened, this is how the Batman died" line from Gordon, is just cinema. Pure, unbridled cinema. Okay, so before we can go any further, we need to discuss the anti-hero in the torture chair, Jason Todd. Spoiler alert, but Jason Todd is the Arkham Knight. I'm sure you all know about Jason Todd. Second Robin got kidnapped, shot, killed, blown up, tortured in Arkham, whatever you believe happened to him, blah blah blah. He's the Arkham Knight. Crazy, I know, but the first time I saw this twist in 2015, I was amazed. I was also 10, which I think goes to show how poor this twist really is. But this isn't all negative, this is the big negative we're going to get out of the way, and the rest of this video is going to be smooth sailing. From the time you spend in Panessa Studios early on in the game basically tells you who the Knight is. Batman having hallucinations of things he never saw happening can be interpreted in two different ways. Lazy writing, or the Joker finally taking over Batman's mind after the events of Arkham City, and the dose of fear toxin Bats ingests in Ace Chemicals. I prefer to look at it as the best of both worlds, but for my enjoyment of the game I lean more towards the latter. But for those of you who are unbiased, you'll see it for what it is. Lazy writing and just poor character moments. There is no way Batman would know Jason was tortured by the Joker in the specific ways Batman sees him tortured in these flashbacks. Although heartbreaking and a few really good moments in there, it's just kind of silly, and as I said in the Spider-Man video, I'm not against silliness. I'm looking at you, Bat credit card. The basic concept of Batman knowing exactly what happened is just stupid, and although some may see this as Batman putting together these things, world's greatest detective and all that, combined with the Joker's memories overtaking him, this just can't be true and it can't work. Although he has the Joker's blood still in him somewhere, albeit nullified, this would mean somehow Joker's blood transfers memories? Yeah, exactly, when you put it like that, stupid. This whole thing was done to make the Jason twist make more sense, because to my knowledge, he isn't really mentioned much in the previous Arkham games. It didn't really work though, but enough negativity, let's talk about the good things. Despite the Joker being a main character after his emotional death in Arkham City, Mark Hamill smashes this performance and makes the Joker genuinely one of the best and memorable parts of this game. And I think it's a perfect send-off to his character in this universe, and considering it's the last time the definitive voices for Batman and Joker shared a screen, or one of the last, it was perfect. Despite him not being real, but in a way, I think this kind of added to his performance and gave him license to run a bit more free with his character work, and do things that wouldn't be possible, or give commentary on events in the game, which just would not have been possible had the Joker still been alive.
What a wanker. Let's put him out of business, eh? Seriously? Do you believe that accent? Bet he only puts it on to sound scary. Please, what are you doing? Bats? Come on! Don't lock me in here. I'll do anything. Want your laundry done? I'll do it. Help out, Alfred. You got it. I wouldn't like to be that guy.
And the slow descent into desperation as he tries to change Batman into himself is so funny to hear and watch. It kind of brings a sort of dark comedy twist to the game, because the comedy he brings to this version of the Joker hits so well. Given the tone of the rest of the game being obviously really dark and quite somber, I think it goes to show how amazing Hamill is, and has always been, as the Joker. And I honestly think this might be one of, if not his best performance as the Clown Prince of Crime. And the same goes for his punchline. Kevin Conroy is the GOAT. We all know that, we all agree. He's the Messi of vengeance, the HBK of TDK, the Batman of, well, Batmans. Kevin Conroy's passing felt like we lost a huge part of Batman as a character, so to have this game be one of his final projects as the Arkhamverse Batman, actually, no, it was the last one. There are no other games in this franchise, actually. He put a lot of genuine emotion into this performance, and it is legendary. And as I said for his partner in crime, I genuinely believe that this might be one of, if not the single best performance he gave as Batman. It's just quintessential Batman. He hits all the beats you'd expect, but towards the end of the game, when he kind of knows his time as Batman's up, he adds this sort of emotional twist to it. And there's a couple of scenes specifically in the game where you can tell Batman's hurting, but he doesn't show it, because he's Batman. And I know that's an overused, he's Batman, but he doesn't show the fact that these things are hurting him because he can't, because it'd get in the way of the mission. And I think Kevin Conroy brings this to perfection. I don't think we're ever going to get a voice actor for Batman as good or as iconic as Kevin Conroy, and the ending of this game really makes his passing so much more upsetting, because obviously the ending of this game, when you get the Nightfall Protocol ending, Batman, after having his identity revealed to the world by Scarecrow, decides that Batman can't protect Gotham anymore. Not now everyone knows he's Bruce Wayne. So he walks into Wayne Manor and after this, it felt like Kevin Conroy's Batman had died. Obviously, we know he didn't because of the Suicide Squad game. But it felt like the years of Arkham games had finally come to an end. And this was Kevin Conroy's final hurrah. I feel like after he passed, it really kind of put this ending into a whole new level of emotional sort of meaning. Because now Batman is actually dead. Like, the Batman who most people have grown up with their entire lives is actually dead. So seeing him, quote-unquote, fake die in Arkham Knight now just kind of hits that little extra. But anyway, onto a less somber note. let's get back to the story, and I think we need to talk about Jonathan Crane, also known as the Scarecrow. Scarecrow is one of my personal favourite Batman villains, and I think he's also one of the most underused and one of the most misused Batman characters across the entirety of Batman's Rogues Gallery. He's such a cool and sort of interesting character, and it always feels like he's playing second fiddle. And so to see him be the big boss of this game was really nice to see. Heading back to Arkham Asylum, and Killer Croc straight up ate this man like a fear-flavoured hot dog. Scarecrow had some of the most memorable parts of the first game in the Arkhamverse, bending the Dark Knight's mind and even on one occasion messing with the
Did anyone catch the game last night?
And although we never directly saw him in Arkham City, we got huge hints at his possible return in the form of a few Easter eggs scattered around the map and even some hidden messages on the cryptographic sequencer. But what they did with him in his limited screen time was good and relatively faithful to the original character. And so he returned in Arkham Knight, this time with a bomb threat and a grudge. Scarecrow, voiced by John Noble, who did a really good job, might I add, basically says that because of Batman getting him eaten by Croc back at the asylum, he's sick to death of the mythic status of the Batman, and he hates this fool and this city, so he's going to spread his fear toxin all over the city by nefarious and morally questionable means. He's going to commit mass domestic terrorism, and so the city evacuates. Initially, I did wonder why he'd evacuate the city if he wanted to launch a gas attack on it. Well, it turns out tonight isn't about hurting the people of Gotham, per se. It's about breaking them and breaking the Batman in front of them to prove he is just a man. Scarecrow's plan is actually a really cool setup for this story. He doesn't want to physically kill Batman, although I'm sure that would be a bonus. He wants to break him mentally and basically expose him as a fraud, thus in turn sort of killing Batman. It's actually a great plan, but anyway, I think the dynamic between Scarecrow and Batman is always interesting, as in some ways, even more so than Batman and the Joker, they are two sides of the same coin. They both use fear to their advantage, and therefore I think they understand each other in a way that other villains don't quite understand Batman. And I think that's why Scarecrow works so well here as the big bad guy. Between the Arkham Knight's Militia being the physical threat and Scarecrow being the mental threat, Batman really gets put through the ringer in this game. And it all comes to a head during the Nightfall Protocol. After having his identity shown to the world by Sackface, the myth of the Batman is dead. Scarecrow actually comes out of this game winning, and for this reason Bruce realised what he needs to do. He talks for the entire game like he knows tonight's going to be his last night as Batman, which leads me to believe he knew he either couldn't win in the traditional sense, or understood what he'd have to do to beat Crane, given the circumstances he's under. And so after being saved by his former protege in the halls of Arkham Asylum, he heads to Wayne Manor, where the press gathers to see the newly unmasked Bruce Wayne for the first time, and he basically drops his house on himself to sell the fact Bruce Wayne is dead, and in turn, sell the fact Batman is dead. This whole ending is really well done. From entering the asylum at Scarecrow's mercy, we can see the writings on the wall. Joker is as far into Batman's head as he's ever been, and at this point, the tipping point is near. A lot of people think this is a pretty anticlimactic ending, given the spectacle it could have been, but in all honesty, I think the point of this ending was to show Batman hasn't failed, but he's finally reached the limit of what he can do as this iteration of Batman. Hence why he becomes something darker and more mythical in the game's final scene by utilising Scarecrow's Fent gas. And I think it's a really poetic and fitting ending for Batman as we knew him. One thing this game absolutely nails is the subtle hints and foreshadowing. And one example that always sticks out to me is the scene which takes place where Commissioner Gordon's daughter Barbara, having been kidnapped by Scarecrow and under the influence of fear toxin, quote unquote, kills herself. During the scene, she grabs a gun which the Joker, not real, slides across the table to her, which if you pay attention and you're, switched on, you can instantly tell that this isn't real because the Joker isn't alive, so therefore he can't move the gun because he's not real. the Joker can't physically interact with the real world and can only interact with things in Batman's head, like the gun. So if you notice this, then the whole thing that Barbara's alive and well is kind of revealed as soon as she supposedly dies. And this whole scene is just amazing, because you're so caught up in the fact that Barbara is in the middle of seeing Batman as a monster while trying to take her own life, you don't realise this clearly isn't real. So in a way, for the second time in Scarecrow's Arkham career, he actually puts Batman and the player in the same shoes, just like he did back in Batman Arkham Asylum.
Did anyone catch?
Alright, I'm going to stop doing that now, but basically, Scarecrow is amazing, and the fact this story puts Batman and the player in the same shoes is just expertly done. Because had you or Batman realised this small detail in such an emotional scene, it would have been rendered useless. Although, I do have my theories that I think in hindsight Batman saw this, maybe not as it happened, but I think even under the emotional stress of the situation, he'd have gone back and thought about it as the night panned out, and realised that Joker gave her the gun, and that's why his reaction was so subdued when he saw her alive. This could just be Batman being Batman, but considering his reaction when Jason reveals himself to be alive, I think he figured it out at some point. Even maybe on the way up to the roof to confront Scarecrow, hence why he never tells anyone she's alive. Just this little detail throws the entire story into a new light, and it's something the game does a fair bit. Like when you go after Scarecrow in the early parts of the game at the Ace Chemicals factory, and you actually find some of Copperhead's poison from Arkham Origins, which I have just realised while writing this script, I haven't mentioned once. I do recognise Arkham Origins as an official entry. I'm an Arkham Origins fanboy, I have been since day one. The cinematics in that game and the boss fights, I love Arkham Origins, but anyway. But yeah, in the central mixing chamber, you can actually find Scarecrow's original mask on the floor, which doesn't make sense because you can also find it on top of a bridge in Arkham City, so unless Scarecrow did some parkour to get back up there to grab his mask to then bring it to Ace Chemicals to chuck it on the floor, it shouldn't really be there, but it's a cool little Easter egg to his past look. Okay, right, I guess I have to talk about it. The four-wheel tank of Gotham. I know, but I won't spend long on it, and I'll try and balance out its screen time in the story. Now, it is fun to finally have a drivable Batmobile in a huge Gotham, of course it is. But did it need to feature in such important moments? No, it didn't. I am a certified Batmobile truther, but even I have my issues with its seemingly omnipresent appearance in Arkham Knight. I don't think the issue, though, should be its quote-unquote overuse, however, but more its usage in important moments. I think there are important story beats, namely the Arkham Knight revealing he knows who Batman is, that take place in the tank, and I don't think that's necessary. A few side missions we're going to talk about later take place in the Batmobile, and again, I don't think it's necessary. I do really love the Batmobile in this game, and I love how it drives, and I love how it feels, and I love its inclusion, but I don't like its third wheeling, no pun intended, in scenes it really doesn't have any place in. That's all I'm saying on it for simplicity's sake, because I do like it. I don't think there's much more to say on it. Overall, Arkham Knight's story is good. It's probably the weakest of the franchise, but still serves off as a great send-off for one of the most beloved renditions of one of the most beloved characters in fiction. There's definitely some other things I could have pointed out, but for the sake of keeping this video sub 1 hour, and because I'm nowhere near smart enough to point the plot holes and inconsistencies out, I'm going to leave this section here, and leave this section by saying, I really like Arkham Knight's story. Does it make much sense? No. If you think about it, does it get ruined a bit? Yes, definitely. But in the end, it does what it sets out to do, and serves as a tasteful ending for a character who definitely deserved such an ending. Batman Arkham Knight is a Rocksteady game, and therefore has all the details and care you'd expect. The character designs, for example, are just perfect. Batman's new suit moves like you'd expect a new semi-futuristic batsuit to, and the cape physics are as good as they've ever been. You can tell hundreds of hours were put into this batsuit design, because it just looks out of this world, and although not my personal favourite of the Batman Arkham suits, this definitely holds up and makes sense within the universe's progression of batsuits. being more militaristic and mean-looking than his previous outings. Characters like Gordon and Aaron Cash maintain and build upon their classic looks from previous games. Gordon looks more casual in this game, but still keeps his iconography, and the same goes for Aaron Cash, who keeps his iconic hook hand, and this is something this game did really well in terms of design. The iconography and not straying too far from the source material in terms of design. Scarecrow is instantly recognisable despite the makeover, Joker keeps his classic Arkham look, Poison Ivy still can't find any damn clothes, Catwoman keeps her classic Arkham City suit, Killer Croc is still big and green, although I'm not actually a fan of Croc's look in this game. I know it's because of his mutation, but it doesn't strike me as much as his Asylum, City, or even much smaller Origins look. Riddler still dresses like a fucking dork, and the Penguin is still the average height of a Reddit mod. Overall, character designs in this game are really good. I'll throw a few on screen of my personal favourites, but the fact this is the last time we'll see a lot of these characters on screen post Arkham City, it's really nice to see the care and attention Rocksteady put into making these characters as memorable and as faithful to the world they built as they could without making them silly or too far from the source material. I feel like I'd be cheating you if I didn't talk about the DLC suits for all of the playable characters in this game, because it's the most support we've ever gotten for a Batman game, and as recently as this year, it's received updates, with the late addition of the Robert Pattinson Batsuit. Basically, every one of Batman's most memorable comic, film and TV looks are here. There's the 1989 suit, the Arkham City suit, Adam West, Batman Beyond, Arkham Origins. Flashpoint, 1970s, his first appearance, The Dark Knight, Batfleck, New 52, and so many more. They're all here, and this is one of the main reasons that I love this game as much as I do. There's really a Batman for everyone, and even the rest of the Bat fam get different looks. Robin has alternate looks, including the Burt Ward and original looks. Catwoman gets two different suits in the forms of her 60s and 90s looks. Nightwing gets two other suits with his New 52 suit and Arkham City look. Harley Quinn gets her OG classic look back. And even the Arkham Knight himself gets his Red Hood uniform for players to equip. And the best part is, they all look absolutely amazing. Perfect down to the last detail.
And I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
And while we're on it, we might as well talk about the other playable character, the Batmobile. The Batmobile gets a bunch of the most iconic looks brought over to the game, including, but not limited to, the Burton-mobile, the Best Batmobile, the Arkham Asylum one, and the Tumbler. And although some of these don't have the combat capabilities of the Bat Tank, the feeling of equipping the Burton suit and Batmobile in the snow and driving around like it's Batman Returns will never get old. Arkham Knight really is the most Batman of the Batman games. A suit for all occasions, a car for every track, and enough customization to make even the snobbiest of Batman fan happy. The graphical side of Arkham Knight is really where it shines though, because Arkham Knight is a gorgeous game. All the Arkham games have their own style and look about them. Arkham Asylum's famous Gothic architecture contrasting with the high-tech security doors and cells, City's distinct districts each with their own recognisable landmark, Origin's snow and sort of comforting Christmas feel, and finally Arkham Knight's sheer size and quintessential Gotham feel. Some detractors may say this game lacks the atmosphere of the previous entries, and it would be hard to debate that. It simply doesn't have the atmosphere of Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, or even, due to the snowy part, some could argue Arkham Origins. It's a much bigger city, and with that comes the lack of smaller, more confined spaces and chances to show that Asylum-esque darkness and eeriness. But I think to survive you must adapt, and as the titular character would, Arkham adapted and came out with the best in-game Gotham we'll probably ever get. With the three main islands, Miagani Island, Founders Island and Bleak Island, separating Gotham into three distinct parts. But in my opinion, that last one's got a harsh name, because there's nothing bleak about that island. Oh, God, I hate writing these scripts. All the islands in this game feel different, and it carries that sort of distinct, okay, I know where this is just by looking around factor that Arkham City mastered. Each part of the map has its own traversal challenges, whether it be the towering financial district of Founders Island, or the rundown streets of Bleak Island. Every area feels different to traverse, and this is all bookended by the shining beacons of Wayne Tower on either side of the city. Graphically, this game is outrageous, and is still one of the best looking games I've ever played. That's not saying much because I haven't actually played many games in total, but for me it's right up there with Red Dead Redemption 2 and Ghost of Tsushima in terms of the ones I've played. I've never known a game to stand the test of time this long, nearly a decade now, in terms of just its graphical fidelity, let alone nearly outdoing 95% of current day games. I mean, it's just special. The rain flying off the cape when you glide after a while of standing in it, the facial animations just being on point at all times, and my favourite part of the game, the lighting. The lighting in this game is so beautiful, and it really makes the world pop. Even in the city, the neon signs and militia turrets, drones and outposts jump out of the screen because how amazing they look, and how well they contrast against the otherwise grimy streets of Gotham. This game also takes place in Halloween, which means not only is it perfect for an October playthrough once a year, it also has loads of Halloween themed decorations scattered about the map, which add a layer of unease. The whole city was evacuated quicker than you can say, "It's the freaking bear!" And so the city was left in a state of use. The decorations and celebrations that were once prevalent were ditched within a moment's notice, and now leave a constant reminder of the people you're fighting for as you try and take down Scarecrow and the Knight. And I think the whole city just looks outrageous. And although very different from its older brothers, I think it stands beside them rather than apart from them. They're all immersive worlds for the Batman to make his hunting ground. I could really do a whole video on the city of Gotham in this game, and I might just do that one day because I think the environments in this game, let alone the city, are just amazing, and they carry that Arkham feel with them, and this carries over into the smallest of locations, like Man-Bat's lab, Bruce Wayne's office, or one of the many other explorable locations Gotham offers. Arkham Knight is one of the most graphically stunning, visually pleasing and carefully crafted games in that sense I've ever played, and combined with the hundreds of different suit and Batmobile combos you can sport, it makes for the best overall Batman experience out there. The city feels alive, riot takes place, cops chase joyriding criminals around the city, and the city itself evolves over the night. And of course, the thug dialogue is there, which is always the best part of the game.
They just don't get it, do they? The mercenary life. Exactly. I put food on the table, blood diamonds in her jewelry box. I laundered all my money through her company. She didn't even have to ask. And she dumps me. I hear you. My other half's a human rights lawyer. He thinks I'm on a business trip.
I love this world and these characters, and I think Knight hit the nail on the head in terms of... oh god. No, I'm gonna have to say it.
Say the line, Bart!
You feel like you're Batman.
Making the player feel like Batman. But what's a good map and stunning visuals without gameplay to boot? Well, let's see what Rocksteady cooked up here. Strap in, because this is good. Have you ever wanted to feel 1/5 of the power you feel after plugging something into a USB port for the first time, all the time? Well, welcome to Batman Arkham Knight Combat. I won't say it's perfect, but it is. It really is. In my humble opinion, it's the best combat we've ever gotten in an Arkham game. Easily top 3, because there's only 4 games. I love it, and the next however long this takes, I'm going to tell you why it's so good. So get ready, because this is going to get dramatic. Free Flow Combat was born in 2009 in the halls of Arkham Asylum, a fast, hard-hitting way to dispatch of escaped inmates. Although simple compared to modern combat systems, back in 2009, this changed the gaming landscape. And that's why every third-person game that isn't a Souls-like decided to use it for the entirety of the 2010s. And it's still a staple of video game combat now. You could smoothly transition from a combo of punches and kicks into a thrown batarang to keep the combo up from afar. It was beautiful. And the stealth wasn't half bad either. Simple, but still it gave you that feeling of being the Predator in a room of prey. Hence its name, the Predator Stealth System. Fast forward to 2011 and Free Flow Mark II snatched the reins from Mark I and ran right with it into Arkham City. The gameplay followed the feeling of the games. It got bigger, deeper, and more Batman than ever, bouncing from one thug to another like back in the asylum, but this time all those gadgets you picked up on your way would be seamlessly thrown into your combos, like a batarang, a bat claw, or ooh, a bat snack, to throw the thugs into a flurry of bat-related carnage with a very slim chance of survival. In a room of 50 enemies, you weren't in danger, you were the danger. The combat and stealth got an upgrade as big as the games they inhabited, full of features that made Asylum feel ancient a mere 2 years on from its first outing. Origins didn't improve much, but it wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to let Rocksteady cook, and cook they did. Say hello to Free Flow Mark III, a beautiful melody of combat and stealth splendour, a smooth, brutal and fun way of protecting Gotham from even the most stubborn of foe. If Asylum, City and Origins were the category 1 to 3 kaijus, then Arkham Knight was the category 4 to 5 kaijus rolled into one. I love Pacific Rim. Arkham Knight looked at the work its forefathers had done for it, took the blueprint and added more depth and more fluidity than ever imagined. Arkham Knight has a low skill floor like its predecessors, mash X and Y and take the other enemy types out last, as, like I said, the other games did. But go beyond that and what you'll find a tale of going beyond what anyone ever thought possible. A delectable flurry of combat, gadgets and above all else, fun. Arkham Knight is quicker than all of its predecessors thanks to the upgrades in hardware for both the player and Batman. A tri-weaved bodysuit consisting of an outer and inner layer of a titanium-dipped tri-weave fibre mesh allows Batman to take down foes like never before. But this isn't the real reason we can finally hit Mach 10 while kicking the almighty god out of mercenaries and thugs. No, this advancement in ass-kicking is down to the new hardware. The Xbox One and PS4 allowed for Rocksteady to make a combat system like no other, by building on their past glories. Free Flow remains untouched by any outside interference. Reach a combo of 5 and you'll enter a flow, a rhythm-based game of snakes and ladders. One mistake and you're back to the beginning, but go past that point of no return and you hit Free Flow, being able to chain your hits, counters and gadget throws into one fluid set of button presses, which, if executed correctly, can lay out a room of ill-prepared criminals in a matter of seconds. Gadgets play a bigger part than ever. A quick-fire batarang flurry might knock a few guys down, but what about a Wonder Waff to chain all those guys together? Or even a classic grab and smash with the old reliable Batclaw, an instant takedown to the uninitiated. Hell, why not try the Freeze Blast? A quick way to cool things down in the heat of battle. Arkham Knight's integration of gadgets into combat is perfected, much like a lot of things in this game. This brings the skill ceiling to the stratosphere. How high can you go? Well, no, not really. How deep can you go? Use it all. Most weapons have a quick fire alternative, and those that don't simply have one just aren't worth looking at, because to be the Bat, you have to think like the Bat, and to do that you have to be efficient, have eyes in the back of your head, and above all else, be resourceful. Enter environmental takedowns, a new way to even the playing field. Batman doesn't kill, but his morals on life-changing injuries are flexible, so are the players. Throw goons into junction boxes, smash them into spotlights, freeze them half to death, bring lights down on their head. It's all brutal, all grim, and all cool. And only better serves the Batman fantasy of using your environment to your advantage. It's new, it's fun, and it's just awesome. You know what's more awesome though? Becoming the Batman. Wait, no, not the Batman, the Batsman. We're going full T20 on them with this one. Batman had to become darker and more unforgiving this time round, and so now he can pick up enemy weapons and bats and go to town on them, smashing all their ribs in one fell swoop, and the only way to get bowled out is if you get hit by one of the small projectiles the petrified thugs might hurl your way. Use these weapons on a brute and it makes light work of them. And oh, did I mention you could use your standard special takedowns and combine them with these weapons for some truly grim endings? Well, you can. And it's hard to watch at times. And all this in tandem with Batman's newfound aggression and tactic of just straight up ground and pound, and things can get messy really quick. All these new ways to wreak havoc are nice, but the enemy adapts. And this time around the Militia saw how Tiger and the writing thugs of the Asylum failed, and brought some serious backup. The Medic is the least aggressive of the new enemy types, and if left unchecked can undo all of your hard work, and revive up to 3 of your favourite punching bags, which, although good for combos, is hell for the Dark Knight's efficiency. So it's best to take these guys down first, before they electrocute some normal enemies, bring them back to life, and electrocute them again to actually just turn them into Electro. The Arkham Knight also brought along a few of his big friends, brutes. There's some normal brutes who just need a good old-fashioned beatdown, but then there's the better equipped brutes, who can seamlessly change between a selection of a new bunch of weapons that they've got in their arsenal. Each of these need their own special weapon or combo to take down in a timely fashion. These guys can cause pain both in the back and in the ass, because they just don't give up. Whether it be a blade dodge takedown, a backlaw, or just a classic punch out, these guys can be beaten away fairly easily, but if you're not paying attention and you let them overwhelm you, they'll catch you off guard before you know they're there. But I've got another riddle. What's better than one highly trained vigilante with a penchant for violence and vengeance? That's right, 2 of them. For the first time in the Arkham franchise, the beloved Bat family members can fight alongside each other, and this means the player can finally run it back to the days of Prime DX and break it down with Nightwing, Robin or Catwoman, and take down thugs at double the rate. Using the dual team takedown, a player can see the Bat combine forces with one of his closest allies in a way previously never seen in these games, and they hold their own against even some of the most hardy of criminals or mercenaries. This system is seldom used in the story compared to how much it should have been, but when it is, it's nice. Calling in Nightwing to flick someone in the air so I can come in and smash them right back down to the ground is never going to get old, especially with the way you can seamlessly transition from one hero to another with no delay. Arkham Knight's combat is all about depth. It's deeper than City when gadgets fly off the handle like a 12-year-old on Modern Warfare, combos string together better than a Jay-Z verse, and most importantly, the whole thing up is wrapped in a nice, visually stunning package. All the combos, takedowns, punches, kicks and beatdowns look gorgeous, taking the visual feast out of the Asylum and Mega Prison and turning it into a visual buffet. Even the most bone-crunching flurries look like something out of a John Wick film, and this only enhances the experience. Free Flow Mark III has it all. The beauty, the beatdowns and the Batman, and this can all be enhanced by spending your sweet Wayne Tech upgrade points, which can be used to upgrade your gadgets in ways that only the smartest of R&D department heads would think of. Everything here gets deeper with time, and the more you spend using these gadgets and the new suit, and you can really become the merchant of justice you came to be. Arkham Knight allows you to become anything from a button-mashing buffoon to a seasoned veteran of the Arkham combat, combining all of your skills from the groundwork laid out by the 3 games before, and allowing you to go higher than ever before. But I think it's time to be quiet, survey our options, and get a bit stealthy. Predator encounters in Arkham Knight are better than ever. Yeah, the enemy AI is still a little dense, but on our end, it's amazing. Batman moves faster than ever in combat, and moves like a slight movement of wind in Predator sections. Hitting thugs blindside or from above, below, or even right in front of their faces, while they frantically look around for you like a bunch of scared monkeys, has never been easier. And with the enhancements to the ever-faithful utility belt, stealth is as fun as it is satisfying. The concept is largely the same. A room of armed thugs, sometimes a hostage. But this'll be easy. Gargoyles are back to be used, an iconic staple of Arkham stealth, but at the same time its biggest detractor. You should be doing yourself an injustice if you stuck to the old faithful and just abused the inverted takedowns, because this system has been expanded on and built to last. The thugs aren't dumb anymore. Oh, okay, they're not as dumb as they once were. They'll shoot down gargoyles or even rig them with bombs if you get too comfortable atop your stone perch. Of course, you're Batman, so you can render these bombs useless using your Disruptor, the best gadget to utilise in stealth. The Disruptor allows you to turn the Predator arena into a playground. You can rig guns to explode when they're fired, turn ammo boxes into faulty electrical wires, or even blow mines up on the same men who place them. Add to this the fact you can render medics useless, and this is a perfect silent assassin. Its only drawback is its limited ammo capacity, but if you really need to move an enemy right below you to get the jump on them, then say hello to the voice synthesizer. With Arkham's newfangled toy, you can trick the prey into moving right into your trap by mimicking their boss's voice. Again, a great addition, but after too many uses, they'll switch radio channel and your newest toy is nothing more than an expensive paperweight. Furthermore, the player can initiate the newest and coolest feature in the game, the Fear Multi-Takedown. A stealth takedown which allows Batman to, in the early game, take up to 3 enemies down in one fell swoop, and in the late game, after spending 8 Wayne Tech upgrade points, Batman can take down up to 5 enemies. This move is so cool and is so useful for getting in and out of situations quickly. You can take down armed henchmen or even use it to start off combat encounters, which I know myself I do a lot. It's really good to do with certain enemy types that you want to clear out the room quickly. For example, medics, stun baton enemies, or even, if you can find them, the detective mode proof enemies. This move was a new move introduced in Batman Arkham Knight and replaced the double takedown from both Origins and City, and personally I think it's one of the best additions in the game for stealth. It makes everything so much cooler and it really leans into the fear factor of the game. The enemies, although trained for Batman, are still petrified of him, so when he pops up and takes down 7 of them, or 5 of them even, in one go, it's really, really cool and very cinematic, and again, I think it's one of the best additions they made to the game. I'm sure you all remember Detective Mode, right? You, as I did, probably saw the entirety of Arkham Asylum through its blue-tinted lenses, but the thugs have caught on to you. They have anti-Detective Mode repellent. Get it? These guys are blue and shiny and can't be seen by conventional Predator means. Easier to see by the naked eye than Detective Mode. They have to be hunted like God intended, with prowess, brutality and a bit of anger, because these guys will be the bane of your existence unless you check them early on and make them useless. Arkham Knight stealth is deeper than any of the Arkham games ever went before it. Perfect? Not quite. A hell of a lot better than anything else that's came before it? Yes. Arkham Knight was made with creativity in mind. Among the heap of hidden features to really encompass what it means to be the Bat, Rocksteady also knew what it meant to let the player become as creative as the Dark Knight, and flex their muscles when dealing with a horde of unrelenting thugs or a room of unsuspecting militia. And this is the main reasons why a lot of fans love this game. It's the best playing game in the franchise, without doubt. The movement is perfected, the combat's perfected, the stealth is as good as it's ever going to get. It's the most immersive game in this regard, and it's something that Arkham Knight excels at. And I think that's something that all of the Arkham games do to their own degree, but Arkham Knight, for me, simply is the best one. Batman Arkham Knight has a lot of side missions, and as promised, we're going to cover all of them over the next few weeks, and each part of each side mission will be getting a ranking out of 10. Every mission will be ranked based on its gameplay, story, and difficulty, and so 30 out of 30 is perfect, and 0 out of 30 is awful. And at the end of all this, each mission will go onto a league table, and we can crown the best side mission in Batman Arkham Knight. There's a ton of missions to go at, but I thought first we'd start with one that I'm very passionate about. Faced Bandit. I've been a Batman fan for as long as I can remember. I have the Dark Knight symbol tattooed on my arm, and one of the main reasons I love Batman is his extensive, terrifying, and sometimes wacky rogues gallery. And a villain I fell in love with while watching The Dark Knight the first time was, no, not the Joker, Two-Face. Aside from the Lego Batman game, this was my first real introduction to the former District Attorney, and I loved it. The literal duality between his two sides, his tragic backstory and fall from grace, are all things I like. During the opening section of Batman Arkham City he even shows up, taking Selina Kyle aka Catwoman hostage, and although his presence was short, I loved it. His design is perfect and the voice was great, and his
Two guns, bitch!
line before getting strung up by Batman lives in my head rent-free, and has done for years, and I have no idea why. I just love Two-Face as a character. So imagine my excitement when, as a small boy, I loaded up Arkham Knight and got a call from Alfred telling me that a bank in Gotham was being robbed. It was thrilling. Finally, my favourite Burns victim would get a chance to shine. A good but short introduction to him in Arkham City was finally about to get its follow-up. A 3-part mission where we'd stop Dent from robbing a bank, maybe take a trip down memory lane with him and discover his origins in this universe, and in the climactic and emotional boss fight we'd finally take him down once and for... Oh. It's just 3 Predator sections. Okay, well, surely they take a while and they give plenty of insight into the mind of Dent while we're taking the goons down, and then ends with a decent boss... Wait, what do you mean there's no boss fight? Two-Face goes down like any other thug? No, I don't care, he's just a normal guy. Respect that, man. So, we're not going to be talking about the Robin DLC in this video either. That's going to be another video. This is purely for the Faced Bandit storyline. So, let's get into the first part, the gameplay. Okay, so Faced Bandit is an interesting set of missions. It boils down to 3 Predator sections that take place in the Chinatown, Kingston and Otisburg banks respectively. All 3 sections begin with Batman being able to stop the thugs' robbery by going in loud due to the bank's alarms keeping the noise of his attack subdued. This is about all these missions bring to the table in terms of unique drawing factor. It is really fun, to be fair, being able to just hit the thugs like a truck and use the fear multi-takedown, knockout smash, and even just combat to take down thugs is really fun. And it really gives the feeling of the brutality this Batman brings to the table, that perhaps other stealth sections don't. So it does get points for this. But after this section comes to an end, the player goes back into a normal stealth section. The banks also have cool little traps for the player to use, with Batman being able to drop chandeliers on thugs, throwing thugs down escalators, or even just shocking them half to death on the electrified floors outside the vault. It's really fun to use these things because they're different. And as far as Predator sections go, these 3 banks are some of the most unique stealth sections in the game. Fun, different, and like I said, unique. And I feel like Rocksteady did a really good job at giving these missions their own unique draw. The banks themselves are all pretty much the same. The first one is 1 floor, and this kind of acts as a tutorial to this sort of mission, and the other 2 feel pretty much copy and pasted. I know they're not, but when I'm playing these missions, I always get mixed up on which one's which. Now, is this a bad thing? Yes, but adding more floors to the banks is a fun change of depth and verticality. But the second and third banks just feel too similar for my liking. Having played the 2 missions recently, I couldn't tell you the major differences between the 2 from memory. The 3 missions all function the exact same, and this is fine. I'm not knocking that. And the banks are fun to traverse and take down thugs in, hence the reason I think Rocksteady did a pretty good job at keeping these sections fun. But overall, the gameplay for these missions is just a bit meh. And this has a giant full stop put on it when we finally get to fight Two-Face in the final bank. Before we get to that, let me take you back to Arkham City, more specifically the final Catwoman mission, where you fight Dent in the museum. I remember this boss fight kicked my ass. It was a stealth section where at some point or another you needed to be loud with a character that you aren't overly familiar with. And this created some really tough moments. Two-Face has a decently sized health bar, takes multiple hits, and this makes sense as he's been proven to be a formidable physical opponent. Arkham City Dent feels like a boss fight. Enter Arkham Knight Two-Face. Oh, and he's gone. Yeah. Two-Face takes the same amount of effort to take down as a normal thug, and that's it. I know Batman's obviously more powerful than Catwoman, but it would have been nice to have even half the challenge of the city fight. Overall, the gameplay in these missions is just okay. It had the potential to be a bit more challenging, and in all honesty, even in New Game Plus, it's a bit of a cakewalk. I do like the banks and the unique factors that brings, but I just wish there was more to say here, but it's just like, there. I'll give the gameplay a respectable 6.5 out of 10. The story of this mission isn't much better. It begins with, as I said, Alfred telling Batman that Chinatown Bank is being robbed, and upon arriving we find out it's Two-Face thugs making the withdrawal. It's a pretty generic setup, but it's okay, it's fine, it's, you know, what more do you want? We take down the thugs and then Batman beats Two-Face, and depending on whether you beat this mission before or after the ending of the main story, Dent can have 2 different dialogues. Either Two-Face will tell Batman that Harvey Dent was dead because of him, with the Dent side of his personality coming out and blaming Batman for Carmine Falcone throwing acid into his face, with Batman even apologising but saying that it wasn't his fault. even though, in the words of Two-Face, he put Carmine Falcone in the dock to begin with. But if you complete this mission after the final scene of the main story, Dent will inquire whether it was true that Batman and Bruce Wayne are one in the same, before huffing some copium and laughing this idea off, since, in his words, Jim Gordon and him didn't strike a deal with Bruce Wayne to battle back against crime. And Two-Face also says he's pretty sure Bruce Wayne isn't who waits around on rooftops at night, which I thought was pretty funny. That's about it really. Usual Two-Face shenanigans. We see both sides of his personality come out, a lot of trauma dumping, and then he gets thrown into the GCPD lockup, before Joker asks the question we've all been wondering.
Impossible! Think of all the crimes you missed while capturing us!
So how's it hanging, Harv? Color me insensitive, but I've always wanted to ask. Did everything get split down the middle?
Depending on when you finish the story, of course, because if you finish the story after Joker has been rid from Batman's mind, we don't get any ha-has here, apart from some words between Harvey and Penguin, and depending on which order you bring them into the GCPD in, this dialogue can change, and again, it's pretty funny. Overall, the story of this mission is pretty simple. Two-Face wants money, Two-Face sends his henchmen to get money, Batman stops him, and then it bleeds over into the flip of a coin Robin DLC. Simple enough. And depending on how you look at it, that's either a mark in its favour or a mark against it. And in my opinion, well, I'm honestly not sure. I'm leaning to the side of it being a mark against. Two-Face has a lot of cool nuances that could have been used here. Whether it be the relationship Harvey and Batman shared, the relationship between Gordon and Harvey, or even just the relationship between Batman and Two-Face that could have been explored from previous games. And all these are interesting things that, again, could have been explored. Maybe even get Commissioner Gordon involved somewhere. I'm not a story writer, but I feel like there could have been some narrative here that wasn't just revenge against the system. Overall, the story here is pretty much non-existent, and compared to some of the other side missions, it doesn't stack up. And given that these missions can be completed in, no exaggeration, 15 minutes from start to finish, there could have been a lot more here, and they could have really fleshed this out to be quite interesting. And so for that reason, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. So, in this section, we'll be talking from the perspective of a person who's decent at the Arkham games and is playing on hard on a first playthrough of the game, and this is the standard we'll rank all the missions on. I'd like to think I'm slightly better than the average Arkham player considering I've pumped half my life into these games, so I'll be taking my own skill out of the question by doing this, and I think it's the most fair way to do it, and this is a good base to begin with. So, say hello to Lego Killer Croc. Lego Croc has played all of the Arkham games on hard once, and he's pretty average at the game. He's our benchmark. And as far as ratings go, 10 really hard, 1 really easy. Overall, the separate levels here weren't overly difficult. They're standard Predator sections with the added benefit of the first half of them being able to be completed fairly easily given the lack of noise detection, due to the bank alarm going off. This definitely helps the difficulty as you can, for example, wipe out the entire first bank before the alarm even turns off. So depending on how you do it, it can be seen as either a reason for it being harder or easier. The levels are also filled with different environmental hazards which can take down enemies really quickly if timed correctly. And if you do time these hazards dropping at the right time, this can pretty much clear a level of a bank for you, which is a little easy to abuse, especially in the final bank. The level of goons you face stay pretty standard until Dent arrives and makes his grand entrance, and this is when things step up. Dent brings along militia soldiers who use medics and also detective mode reflector enemies, which, depending on when you finish the mission, can be a shock to the player, as they might not have been properly introduced to these yet. But these enemies do provide a certain level of challenge to mix things up for the few final takedowns of this mission line. The level layouts also allow for plenty of vent takedowns, grate takedowns, inverted takedowns and gadget based takedowns, which can make the rooms pretty derivative. This means the player doesn't have to use all of the tools in their arsenal as much as other rooms, and the added detractor of having Two-Face be genuinely no harder than a normal thug means these levels can be cleared super easy. And again, this whole mission line can be knocked out in like 15 to 20 minutes. I think these missions would be pretty easy for Lego Killer Croc, and he'd definitely find them kind of boring. Overall, on the difficulty scale, I'd give this mission line a 4. They're just giant predator rooms with plenty of cool and unique gimmicks to take down enemies in quick succession, which does make the missions fairly simple, if not fun. Overall, Faced Bandit serves as a fun and unique set of predator encounters, with the added benefit of having one of Batman's most iconic foes as the big baddie in the background. But sadly, these missions just don't utilise the character to his full potential. And that's a real shame, because we've seen in other media how well Two-Face can work when put into a story that accommodates his unique character trait. By no means do I hate these missions. In fact, I don't think I hate any of the side missions in Arkham Knight. But overall, this mission set just left a lot to be desired. And if we total its scores in our 3 categories, it ends on a slightly below average 14.5 out of 30. Anyway though, enough of Two-Face, I've got a joke. What killed the dinosaurs?
The Ice Age!
Okay, right, now I've gotten that out of my system, welcome back. Batman's villains are as memorable as they are strange, as tragic as they are misunderstood, and no villain encompasses all of this more than Mr. Freeze. A villain who was sadly looked down upon, until Batman the Animated TV series gave the disgraced scientist a new backstory, which became his recognised definite origin. A former cryogenic scientist who was betrayed while trying to find a cure for his dying wife, who he froze to save her from dying from a degenerative disease, and while doing this he turns to crime to fund his experiment, and keep his one true love alive in hopes of one day thawing her out when he finally has a cure for her. And he's become a mainstay in Batman media since this story was first shown, in the classic episode of Batman the Animated TV series Heart of Ice, written by Paul Dini, who some of you Arkham fans might know as the writer of Batman Arkham Asylum. This time around, we'll be taking a look at the side mission In From the Cold, a personal favourite of mine. In From the Cold's story can be accessed through the Season of Infamy DLC, and becomes available about 60% of the way through the main story. It begins with Alfred telling Batman that a large ship has been spotted off the coast of Gotham, the Nora, and it's covered in militia soldiers who aim to give Batman a cold reception. We head to the ship and freeze the militia's assault on the ship before heading to the lower deck to find a flustered and desperate Mr. Freeze rushing to try and save the ship's cryo-generator, which is the only device that can stabilise his wife, Nora's, cryostasis pod, which is keeping her alive. The two uneasy allies talk, with Freeze telling Batman that the militia kidnapped Nora, and if he were to kill Batman, they'd give him Nora back. Batman knows the militia don't work like that though, and basically tells Freeze that if he trusts them, he should take his shot. And Freeze sees how this probably isn't the best idea, because if he took his shot and missed, he'd lose Nora and Batman, his best chance at getting her back. Freeze gives Bats a tracker to find Nora, and well, he does just that. Well, not really. The militia move the tracker into an icebox to trick any potentially interested bats. And after clearing the rooftop he found the box on, Batman interrogates a soldier who tells him Nora is actually in Otisburg, and after taking out the surrounding thugs, Batman attempts to keep Nora secure. But the pod opens and Nora comes out, free from her icy hell for the first time in over a decade. Batman tells Freeze his wife is awake, and after a short back and forth she tells him she just wants to live her last few days out with him, but he says he can try to get her safe so he can come and create a cure for her. But as the conversation comes to an end, the generator on Freeze's ship blows up, and so Batman puts Nora in the back of the Batmobile, and the two race to go and find Victor, only to be confronted with an army of militia Jones trying to take him out. And as the fight gets too overwhelming for the combined forces of Batman and Freeze, Freeze reluctantly sacrifices his last chance at saving Nora, after he realises everyone here is going to die if he doesn't do it, and in doing so he detonates the ship's generator, taking down all of the militia forces and saving his wife, but only for a few days. When the snow settles and Freeze and Nora finally reunite, she tells him she doesn't want to be saved, and she was awake the whole time she was frozen, essentially in limbo for over a decade. And this is what makes Freeze realise he needs to enjoy their last few days that she has alive together, enjoying their final few days before the disease inevitably takes Nora from them again. Alfred asks if they should keep tracking them, and Batman lets them go free, knowing Freeze won't be an issue now. And as snow covers the Gotham skyline, the couple set sail. Where do I even begin with this story? It's amazing. It's fairly short, but just long enough to pack all the emotional gut punches and cool moments in which are the foundation of any good Mr. Freeze story. My favourite part of this story is how they handle Nora. In most stories where the focus is just on Victor and his wife, Nora feels like an object, like a plot device to either be used as bait for Freeze, motivation, or an emotional crutch for Freeze to pin his crimes on. But after the second part of this mission, it really feels like Nora is her own character. And obviously this is helped by the fact we get a rare, actual, alive appearance from her, which is nice to see. You can tell how much she's hurting throughout the missions, and she knows how much Victor wants to save her. But she doesn't want that anymore. She's been frozen in time for, like I said, over 10 years. And when she finally gets free of her icy prison, she knows that she can't be saved. She is a ticking time bomb, and she knows this, and it's only Victor's hope that keeps her stuck in the limbo of being frozen. And so he's actually torturing her while trying to save her, which brings up the moral implications of him trying to save her in the first place, and in doing so, keeping her in a constant state of pain and confusion. And a line at the end after Victor tells her he doesn't want her to die, and she just replies with,
"Then let me live."
Damn. Okay, that's depressing. The story also gives closure to Mr. Freeze, who became a bit of a fan favourite amongst Arkham fans after his blockbuster boss fight in Arkham City, followed by his ending with Nora in that game after Batman finds her and tells Freeze where she is, reuniting them, and after these events it felt like Freeze was snubbed, especially when he wasn't put in the main game. So to have him given such an emotional and fitting send-off through the Season of Infamy DLC feels right. And I think they nailed the whole thing. It's short and sweet, it doesn't overstay its welcome and make people wish Freeze would just thaw out and die, and it doesn't underwhelm people either. And I really like the fact they gave this character who people love plenty of time to shine in his final outing in the series, and did it in a way which felt like it could have been in the animated series, and felt like it was full of respect for both the characters and the source material. Overall, I think this story is great. Like I said at the top of this part, the fact this mission isn't too long but still manages to make you feel for Freeze, and it doesn't paint him in the light of a bad man but a conflicted one, really shines through, and they did a great job at making this whole mission line feel like something from the animated series, and I think that's pretty hard to do in the Arkham universe. I love how they handled Nora, and I think the ending Freeze and her get is one they deserved after all they'd been through until this point. And my only quote-unquote critique, if you could even call it that, was that I wish it was slightly longer, and for that reason I'm going to give it a very respectable 10 out of 10. Onto the gameplay. The overall gameplay of these missions is good. It consists of 2 stealth sections of different sizes, a combat section which is relatively small but varied in terms of enemies, and finally a Batmobile section. Now, I love the fact that these missions are varied. Arkham Knight is so streamlined and perfected, whether it comes to the combat, the stealth, or even the driving. And so the fact that this mission gets plenty of variety across its 4 main missions is a really nice change, because some missions are either all the way into stealth, all the way into combat, or in some cases all the way into the Batmobile, which can get repetitive. But this mission line lets the game's gameplay shine through, and the urgency which is placed on the player to complete them add a level of wanting to be as efficient as possible while doing them. I specifically want to discuss the first stealth section and the last Batmobile section. The first stealth section is really unique, as it takes place on the top 2 decks of a boat, and is very reminiscent of the final offer section from Batman Arkham Origins, which was a nice little, oh yeah, this kind of feels a bit familiar. And I think the set piece of being on a frozen ship is great, and it does strike that fine line of being unique and also familiar, and that is always a bonus. It's a huge section and takes some time to complete, with the enemies being varied as well, with there being medics, a drone pilot, detective mode deflective enemies, and obviously normal soldiers, which means you have to use the full length and breadth of the ship to take them down. There's also a turret in the control room, which provides an extra layer of challenge to taking out the last guy. Not much challenge, but enough to catch you off guard if you just stroll in and don't notice it. This is probably the most memorable section of the mission in terms of gameplay, but a close second, both visually and gameplay wise, for me at least, is actually the final fight in the Batmobile. It begins with Batman racing to save Freeze and his ship in the Batmobile, and this is on a timer, which again feeds off the urgent feeling this mission set. And when you get there, it's basically just a massive team deathmatch between you and Mr. Freeze and the Militia, and it's actually really cool. The variety of drones combined with the sheer numbers they throw at you makes this part quite challenging. It ends with Freeze blowing the generator on the ship, which takes down all of the Militia tanks, and again, this whole section's pretty cool. It feels like Freeze's final stand, and I think again it's a good final act for such a beloved character as he saves everyone there. The pure variety of mission types combined with the overall urgency in which is instilled for you to complete them really makes you feel like you're in a race against time to save Nora and fight back the militia who've taken her. There is a small combat section, and this is a little bit lackluster. However, not in the way that it's too easy or poor quality. Every other section in this mission feels like, I don't really know how to explain it, but like, if you've seen the Magnificent Seven, like the ending of that, like very sort of final standy. And this bit is a very short and sweet combat section, but it pulls it back with the sheer variety of enemies within the section, having ninjas, a brute, and normal guys. And so I can't hate on it too much. It's still fun, and although the weakest of the sections of these mission lines, it still feels good to play. It doesn't take away from the overall experience of the mission, because it's fun and it's another excuse to use the combat of the game. Overall, the gameplay of this mission is good. It gives the player plenty of opportunity to experiment with each part of the game, and while keeping it varied, and even using the Batmobile to its full extent, and in a fun and healthy way which doesn't make you feel like it's shoehorned in, at least in my opinion. So, considering the stealth sections are both fun, the combat section is varied, and the Batmobile part is probably one of the best Batmobile parts in the game, I'll give it an 8. It misses out on a higher rating for two main reasons that could easily have been solved. The first one is the combat section could have been a bit bigger, and the second one is a continuous theme throughout the game, but the Batmobile being used at a key point in the story. The only saving grace is that at least it's a good bit of Batmobile gameplay, and so let's move on, and let's see how hard this mission really is. Is it a nice and easy walk in the park, or a cold reception for new players trying to complete this mission? Difficulty is a sliding scale, so to keep things fair, we'll be using a base level of a person who's played all the Arkham games on hard once and is fairly casual, playing this mission for the first time. And so say hello to Judge Holden. Holden has played through Arkham Asylum, City, Origins, and he even quite enjoyed Blackgate. Look, he's not all there, but don't say that to his face. But anyway, he'll be our benchmark. 10 is the hardest, 1 is easy, so let's go. As a general summary, I'd say these missions are pretty varied in terms of the difficulty. The first Predator section is quite challenging. The different enemy types can definitely catch you off guard, and the overall layout of the map is different from your standard Predator encounter, being a boat with multiple layers being used in this encounter, rather than the usual dual-layered room used in most other encounters. The turret in the control room is also a nice touch, as although it can be bypassed fairly easily, it can be a stumbling block if you somehow don't notice it, and the drone pilot and other enemies can definitely cause issues. The second encounter is the combat encounter, and again, if you go in unprepared, it can be fairly tricky, nothing too hard, but the placement of the ninjas, which I know personally always throw me off my combos because they're in different attack patterns, and the one brew is also another stumbling block. That actually managed to hit me when I was recording gameplay for this video. It's a pretty small group of enemies, but varied, and this does make it a bit of a challenge. The third section of the mission is another Predator section, and it's a really cool layout on what I think is the ruins of an old rooftop. It's really unique, and for whatever reason reminded me of a Call of Duty multiplayer map. It's covered by 3 snipers, and there's quite a few enemies which need to be taken out to get to Nora, and this bit was actually fairly difficult. Again, not overly hard, but certainly a section which caused me some issue, and I quite enjoyed the map layout and challenge it posed. And finally, the Batmobile section. The race to get to Freeze is fairly easy, and the time limit, although adding a sense of urgency, is fairly lenient and allows for plenty of mistakes. And once you get to Freeze, the real challenge begins. You get so many enemies thrown at you, and the arena is so tight that it can be tough, especially the second part of the mission. Although short, it can be tough, but this is just through sheer quantity. And so this section can be a stumbling block if you're not switched on and don't use the many tools the Batmobile provides. Overall, the difficulty is varied, much like the mission types. It can be easy, or it can be fairly difficult at the drop of a hat. I think the judge over here would find it a fair challenge. He'd probably be fine and get through it, but he'd definitely have to think about what gadgets to use and where the enemies were in each given section. So I've judged that the difficulty is fairly balanced, and sometimes slightly unfairly balanced on the harder side, and therefore it's been given an 8. Overall, In From the Cold is a really fun, emotional and gripping send-off driven by its characters, and I think it's a great send-off for Mr. Freeze in this universe, and however fleeting his happily ever after might be, I'm glad we got to see it play out. Nora is handled really well. Freeze finally gets his real ending, and I think Rocksteady chose a really fitting and faithful ending for one of the most beloved characters in the Batman universe. This is all helped along by the fact that the mission variety is good, and the missions themselves all feel fairly fleshed out, and they don't just feel like a cheap way to get Freeze into the game. The characters are the real driving force behind this mission though, and they're all painted in a way which makes you realise that everyone apart from Nora here is definitely in the grey when it comes to morality, and I think it nails the feeling of a quintessential Mr. Freeze story. It's emotional, fun, and leans into Batman's more over-the-top side, and it finishes off with Freeze and Nora finally getting their happily ever after, even if only for a few days. This mission line is really good. Great even, and it will be a cold day in hell when you hear me really criticise this mission, because although it has some flaws, there isn't really much to dislike here, and for that, when we combine all the scores, it finds itself on a very respectable 26 out of 30. Out of one of my favourite side missions and into another, A Perfect Crime is by far and away my favourite mission in Batman Arkham Knight, and probably one of my favourite pieces of Arkham content in general. So how does it stack up to its contemporaries? Oink oink piggies, welcome to the slop trough. Eat up. Jesus, not you, what are you? Oh my god, what is that? Welcome back. Batman has some truly diabolical villains. Murderers, thieves, terrorists, but what's worse than being killed or robbed blind, blown up, or even made to read All-Star Batman and Robin? Well, being dead but still alive. Here's where today's subject comes into play. Professor Pig, a sadistic surgeon who mutilates, destroys, and leaves alive his victims in pursuit of making them into his perfect, obedient Dollartrons. A fact about Pig I find quite funny is that his first appearance was in Batman issue 666. You can make of that what you will. Anyway, this episode will feature some pretty grim subject matters, so if that isn't for you, this is a warning. The story of A Perfect Crime can actually begin before even the main story, but if you attack it after the beginning of the main story, Aaron Cash tells you about a dead body that's been found strung up and mutilated so badly, even the forensic boys were disturbed. After gliding over to the body and hearing some ominous opera music blaring out from the body's location, things get messy. Batman scans the body using his deep tissue scanner. An ear deformity, a wedding ring in the lower intestine, and a hip replacement. Strange, unique imperfections on an otherwise generic body, strung up and labelled flawed by the writing on the floor. Another victim, more opera music, same case as before, strung up, labelled failure. This time it's scars from a prison, arthritis in the left knee, and a pacemaker. And as Alfred points out, Gotham has a serial killer in its midst. Not Zaz though, this isn't his MO. Leaving bodies strung out to dry like slabs of meat, that's not him, and the rabbit hole continues. 4 more victims show up. 4 more locations where the air is filled with the haunting sound of opera, all with 3 unique identifiers which separate them from the crowd and make them more easily identifiable in a sea of people, yet all generically decorated in their final moments. Facial wraps to hide the scars, a hospital-like gown to cover the body. We've got a problem here, and whoever's doing this isn't slowing down. Flawed, failure, imperfect, broken, defective, reject. And as the night gets deeper, the pieces start coming together. All of the victims were taken from parks or recreational areas. The same route of parks is the route taken by the Circus of Strange, ran by a mysterious ringleader, Laszlo Valentin. Valentin leased a property in Gotham, a beauty parlour by the name of Pretty Doll's Parlour. Batman heads to the parlour and hears the same opera music, here, as was accompanying all the bodies. A haunting theme tune for a spree of the worst crimes imaginable. Within the confines of the parlour's back rooms, Batman finds a man wearing a pig mask, cutting and picking at a man laid out on a table, with the same bandage mask and hospital gown as the previous victims. Professor Pig stands with knives and other instruments of death, cutting, chopping and changing, all in pursuit of making one of his minions, a Dollartron. A fate worse than death. Forced to live out the rest of your miserable life with no thoughts, no feelings, no pain, no joy, just following orders from a madman whose humanity is further gone than your own. Pig tells Batman he's making these people better. Perfect. His perfect crimes victims. Batman sees this clearly isn't the case. He sees the future victims being held in cages above the operating table, waiting to face the same fate as Pig's other victims. But as he goes to check on the man lying on the table, stripped of his personality and uniqueness, the man springs back to life, following orders from Pig like he programmed him to. Their orders? Capture the Dark Knight so he can be made perfect too. One small issue. These Dolatrons, these poor contorted husks of the human condition, don't feel pain anymore, so they need to be made to stay down. They can't feel anything, so as much as it would be a mercy killing were Batman to take their lives, he can't do it. That's not his way of doing things. So these men and women are knocked out, painfully but efficiently. Pig enters the mud pit of a room, but this isn't a real mud pit, or even a back room behind a former beauty parlour anymore. This was an operating table, and Pig was the latest patient. Batman dishes out justice in the only way he can given the circumstances, taking Pig down once and for all. He rescues the victims who were previously awaiting their inevitable fate, but now await the sweet taste of freedom thanks to Gotham's Crusader, and he places Pig in the back of the Batmobile, to be taken to the holding cells of the GCPD, where he can't hurt anyone ever again. On the drive back to his final stop, Pig professes how he can't let his mother down, and how all he was trying to do was make these people perfect. They were flawed and needed to be purified and made into Pig's twisted vision of perfection. Batman tells Pig that the imperfections left on the victims were how he pieced the puzzle together, and found Pig, and ultimately that's how he lost. After throwing Pig into the cell, we can hear the members of Gotham's Most Wanted say how much they think Pig is disturbed and messed up. The Joker in Batman's mind tells us how even he thinks Pig is deranged beyond all comprehension. And what makes this even worse is that if we visit the victims of his crimes, we see they're in a constant state of being terrified forever. No emotional responses, no happiness, no joy, no pain, no death. Just Pig. God, okay, so that was dark. Perfect Crime is one of my personal favourite side missions in Arkham Knight. The whole murder mystery aspect of the Arkham games have always been something I like, whether it be the various crimes in Origins, tracking Officer Bowles in Asylum, or the crime scene reconstruction in any of the games. It's something I like, and we get to see another side of Batman which isn't shown off too much. Well, not as near as much as it should be. I love how dark and depraved this story is. It's such a different tone from the rest of the missions in the game, and upon a first playthrough was really shocking. And the great utilisation of what most would consider to be a B-list villain and making him into a great street level threat was amazing. Honestly, I love this mission's story. It's simple and throws up a few issues regarding Batman's no-kill rule and how far someone would have to go to get him to break that rule. Because if anyone deserves a swift death at the hands of a special combo takedown, it's Pig, and probably in a mercy-killing way, his victims. Given the dark subject matter, the execution of the story, and how it's presented, I think A Perfect Crime gets a healthy 8 out of 10. It scratches the detective itch that many Batman fans have when playing the Arkham franchise. It's easy to follow, and above all, it builds Pig as a really disturbing and credible threat going forward. But, as per usual, no good story is complete without even better gameplay. So, let's see how the gameplay matches up compared to its contemporaries, and see if The Perfect Crime is really as perfect as it makes itself out to sound. The gameplay of this mission line is really unique. You need to find all the 6 bodies scattered about the map by using the opera music heard ringing around the location of the body, and then when you find the body, the actual gameplay begins. Batman uses a deep tissue scanner to locate 3 different unique identifying factors. One on the skin, one around the muscles, and one at the bone. And after finding these 3 things, Batman can identify who they were before Pig got to them. I think this is an especially unique process in these games. Finding a body or just coming across one in the open world is always a horrifying sight, and it really shocks you into being a detective for a few minutes, which isn't always something Batman media puts in the spotlight. But, as in usual fashion, the Arkham games are really good at this, and really make you feel like you're utilising all of the facets of Batman. I like the process of finding these different outliers, switching through the different levels of scan and highlighting the different parts. It's something we've never seen in an Arkham game to this extent, and I think if there was ever a villain to break out a new detective-like feature for, it should probably have been Mr. Pig. As far as the combat section goes at the end of the mission where you face off against the Dolatrons, it's different, and much like a lot of things in this mission, it's unique. It begins by just fighting Pig's experiments, but the added twist is, they can't be knocked out unless you use a special combo takedown, an environmental takedown, or a ground takedown. So this adds some level of challenge, and although there's no variety in the level of enemies you face, it's fun and different. And this is spiced up a little when Pig enters the fray and begins hurling cleavers at you, which need to be countered in waves of 3 and thrown back at Laszlo. There isn't a huge amount of variety here in terms of gameplay, The detective sections are really cool, and I like the fact the main crux of this mission is Batman being the world's greatest detective. It's also really cool to see Alfred and Bruce deduce who the issue is as you find the bodies, which ultimately leads to the pairing finding out who Laszlo Valentin is. And this is another cool aspect, the fact Alfred gets time to shine. Alfred is a very competent, helpful and smart character, and although he gets a lot of time during the game to shine, this mission in particular lets him shine the brightest, I think. The combat section is fun too. It's really eerie to be fighting these completely brain-dead victims of one of the worst fates known to man, while haunting opera music blares around the arena. It's grim, it's filthy, and it's great in the worst way. Pig drops in to shake things up a bit, and this mission is getting a point for letting you smash him through a table and then drop your fist into his nose. It's satisfying as all hell, and I think when we look at all these factors, we get a mission which is more cinematic than it is gameplay orientated. As its own standalone mission, the gameplay is unique, but not overly thrilling. Fun, but not particularly challenging. And for that, The Perfect Crime gets a lukewarm 5 out of 10. A good mission line filled with its own nuances and memorable moments, but it's certainly not renowned for its gameplay and is more recognised for its story, characters and how it handles these things. But how hard is the mission? Well, let's see. As per my 2 previous videos, the difficulty will be ranked from 1 to 10, with 1 being easy and 10 being hard. And since difficulty is very subjective, again as per usual, we'll be using a baseline who's played the Arkham game series once on hard and is very casual. So for this episode I've brought in Professor Pig's fellow pork-based fictional character, Ham from Toy Story. Ham is a pretty hardcore gamer as we've seen in the films.
I can't find it! It doesn't seem to be on any of these stations!
Keep looking.
Oh, you're going too slow. Let me take the wheel.
It's too fast! How could you even tell what's on?
I can tell.
There it is. Go back.
Back!
Too late. I'm in the 40s. Gotta go around the horn. It's faster.
Stop.
I look for the giant chicken!
Now, Etch.
But he's not a huge Arkham fan. He's played all the mainline games once, but doesn't sweat challenge maps or side content too much. But how could he resist supporting a fellow pig? Well, this is going to be a fairly short section. The hardest part of this mission line, in my opinion at least, is actually finding the bodies. Because unless you use a guide or my beloved Batman Arkham videos, it can be tricky to find the victims, even with the opera music letting you know you're in the vicinity. And I know there was a few times when recording gameplay for this video that, despite 240%ing this game 3 times, my memory just failed me and I had to take a few minutes to find certain bodies. So this can actually be quite tricky and I think it's quite cool. What's even cooler is when you just accidentally stumble across one, as, again, even after completing the game 4, 5, 6 times, it's still like oh, there's a dead body there, which, you know, it's not something you hear every day. The actual detective parts are fairly easy. It's just a case of making sure you're on the right filter for the level of body you want to scan, and then scanning it head to toe and locating the bright yellow identifiers. It's really easy. That's not really a bad thing, but I'm sure this could have been harder with a few tweaks, like making the deformities or differences not bright yellow? I don't know, but overall, it's simple. But you know what's easier than that? The combat sections. You just punch them until you have enough combo to build up to finish them off, or you can knock them down once and use a ground takedown, or even better, and more morally questionably, you could just smash these innocent people's heads into electric boxes and wall-mounted fans, and then throw the knives back at Pig using the counter button, and then also throw him through an environmental object. Overall, after you find the bodies, this mission's basically a cakewalk. Ham here would have no issue locating the killer, and his big issue would be finding the bodies. The combat is also too easy for Ham in all honesty due to the lack of variety in the fight. But again, this isn't a bad thing. This mission is clearly meant to be much slower paced than some of the other side missions in the game, and I'm not opposed to this. Overall, in terms of pure difficulty, me and Ham have decided to give this mission a low but warranted 4 out of 10. The hardest part is finding the bodies, and after that, it's pretty much smooth sailing. Again, not a bad thing. This mission just serves as a slower paced detective thriller akin to Seven rather than a Michael Bay blockbuster, and that's okay. Overall, A Perfect Crime is a personal favourite mission of mine, and one that I couldn't wait to talk about. Its tone is grim, and the fact Pig got time to shine in Batman's final outing before the Nightfall Protocol was just great. It shows Batman's rich vein of villains and great history with these villains, and it lets Pig shine on the grandest stage, something I'm sure he's thrilled about. I do love this mission, and love its very David Fincher's Seven-esque feeling it's got going on, and a good murder mystery was definitely welcome amongst all the ass-kicking and explosions the rest of the game has to offer. And if we combine all the scores together, a perfect crime gets 17 out of 30. However, I don't think this rating system does this mission line justice, as it sits alone at a table which exclusively invites slow burns with detective-based gameplay. And so although its score is low, this mission isn't bad, and it's far from it. I love this mission, and you should too. Professor Pig might have not been perfect, but someone who comes pretty close to that in this series is Killer Croc. After his amazing introduction in Batman Arkham Asylum, his great introductory boss fight in Batman Arkham Origins, he comes back in Arkham Knight with a vengeance with one of the best side missions in the series. Killer Croc is a Batman villain who I love. He's just so Batman? A man whose fate who was thrust upon him when he had no say in the matter, who's now forced to live out his days surviving in a world that simply doesn't want him. He's great. His design is cool 99% of the time, and he's my favourite Lego figure of all time. And he also played a part in scaring the ever-loving Jesus out of me as a child in Arkham Asylum. I have to admit, I was disappointed he only made a small appearance in the sequel to Asylum, Arkham City. It was nice to know he was still out there, but ultimately, as a Croc truther, I felt robbed. And so when he was added in Arkham Knight in the Season of Infamy DLC, my heart grew 3 sizes. I have my reservations about his design, I do know the lore reason, but quite frankly, his Asylum and City... Sorry. Is there a lore reason why Killer Croc is huge? I do know the lore reason, but quite frankly, his Asylum and City looks are his best ever designs, and I was heartbroken they mutated Mr. Jones into a bigger, meatier monster than before. He was one of the longer side missions in the Season of Infamy DLC, and one of the more thoughtfully crafted ones. So, let's take a deep dive into Gotham's Bay and see how Croc stacks up to his challengers by talking about the story. The story begins with Nightwing telling Batman that the floating prison that is the Iron Heights Penitentiary has crashed off the coast of Gotham, and it's not looking good. Batman tells Dick to meet him there, and we head to the formerly floating prison. After entering Iron Depths Penitentiary, we get what I believe is one of the most atmospheric locations since Asylum. The prison itself is so cool to walk through. It carries that quintessential Arkham Asylum feel. Bodies strewn about the place, blood, fire, cages hanging from the ceiling. It's honestly great. I'm just going to let some gameplay play that I recorded when I was doing recording for this video, and it's just really cool. I don't know why I got so giddy over this, but I'll let that play now.
You shouldn't have come here, freak. You just got added to the menu. Help me, Batman.
But we begin making our way through the wreckage and rescue guards who survived the crash. And one of them tells us that Waylon Jones, also known as Killer Croc, attacked the engines, hence the crash, and he's now on the loose. The guard also tells Batman that the Warden Rankin, is missing, somewhere nearby. And when Batman finds him trapped in what I can only assume was once an elevator maybe, Croc appears, bitch slaps Bat, and runs off with the Warden. And as Batman begins pursuing the Warden and Croc, he tells Nightwing to meet him at his location before being surrounded by prisoners. Luckily, Nightwing swoops in and the original Batman and Boy Wonder team up, take down the prisoners, and then head into the control room, where they find Prisoner Officer Blackburn, who tells the dynamic duo that the Warden was taken into the lower levels of the ship, but the door to said levels can't be opened without a dual-access keycard system. The only issue is, the only 2 men with said keycards bailed when the ship started going down. Of course they did. Batman heads out into the, as Alfred says, safety, quote-unquote, of Gotham, and tracks the pair down. One didn't make it, hanging by his parachute from a crane, and the other one is found being beaten up by Scarecrow's thugs, and after clearing them out, the officer is really reluctant to give Batman his card, telling him that when Batman gets down there, to remember that those who work there were only doing their jobs. Bit of a side note, but I really like this. On the glide back to the ship, you really begin thinking what actually is going down there, and this makes the initial reveal of what was happening to Croc when you get down there all that more disturbing. After getting back to the ship, Batman and Nightwing enter the lower levels and see what was going on in Iron Heights. Again, I'll let this scene play out for you because it's really good.
Track the subject back to its den, located beneath the Founders Island lighthouse. It suffered minor injuries during capture. Fortunately, wounds did not impede immediate testing. The creature's regenerative healing factor is quite remarkable. Superficial lesions can repair almost instantaneously, and the subject's hand is now fully regrown post-amputation. Further surgeries have been scheduled to see whether tissue growth can be accelerated. Human trials are underway. Stabilizing the recombinant DNA is our next step. We have lots of work ahead of us. As an aside, the subject's physiology is altering, possibly as an adaptive response to trauma. Sedatives are becoming less effective. Termination, although undesirable, must be considered.
They discover through video diaries that the team at Iron Heights, and more specifically Warden Rankin, were experimenting on Crocs and the prisoners to try and weaponize Croc's accelerated healing factor and use it on people. And to do this, they cut off his limbs, sedated him, and tortured him, all in the pursuit of this twisted experiment. The dynamic duo then come to the realization they've been after the wrong guy. Obviously, Croc needs to face justice for the murders he's committed, but the real villain here is Rankin. So when Batman and Nightwing find Croc threatening to kill Rankin after strapping him to the same chair Rankin would torture Croc in, they jump in and fight Croc and the inmates surrounding him, who are also victims of the experiment. After a lengthy fight, the dynamic duo take down Waylon Jones and the inmates, and Batman interrogates Rankin and tells him quite rightly that he's the real monster here, not Croc. And in an ironic twist of fate, when Croc, the inmates, and Rankin are taken to GCPD, the disgraced warden is locked up with his former inmate and in a cell right next to Croc, bringing the whole arc wrapped up into a neatly wrapped bow. So as far as Killer Croc stories go, I think this is one of the better ones. In a similar vein to Batman Earth 1, Croc is painted as a sympathetic villain rather than a monstrous hulking beast, and I think the story does this really well. And if anyone's got any suggestions of other really good Killer Croc stories, tell me, because I really like Killer Croc. He's one of my favourite villains. I don't know why. I think it was Arkham Asylum that got me into Killer Croc. But obviously in this story, Croc isn't completely in the right. He's killed people. He's ruined a prison. Like, he's put people out of jobs. He's a bad guy. But he's not the main villain here. Rankin is. I think this story is really cool. It's not perfect and it's fairly short, as are most of the side missions in the Season of Infamy DLC, but overall, I think it's good. It's unique, its set designs are some of the best in the game in my opinion, and it takes advantage of the Waylon Jones side of Killer Croc, which is something I don't think we see enough of. And for all those reasons, I'm going to bestow a healthy 8 out of 10 onto Beneath the Surface, and move on. In summary, it's good, original, and I like it quite a lot. It's not perfect, but it's cool, so let's see how the gameplay stacks up, shall we? Beneath the Surface's gameplay is about as Arkham as it gets. It begins by travelling to a location, helping some people, combat, glide, vents, combat. And in all honesty, it's fine, I'm not knocking it. The combat in this game is the best it's ever been in the Arkham series, so the fact that there's plenty of it is always a bonus. And you will never hear me take away points from anything for letting us beat people up using the free flow combat system. The variety of combat is good too. We get to use the dual team system twice throughout this mission, which is fun, and getting to see Batman and Nightwing fight side by side is cool, and it adds to the immersion of the game because it feels like, despite the fact you play primarily as Batman throughout the story, Batman isn't all alone in Gotham, and it's great to be able to see further the dynamic between Bruce and Dick as the mission gets further along. As I said earlier, the combat in Arkham Knight is basically a perfected system when it comes to the free flow combat, and this mission line we get a ton of it, with plenty of depth in how you deal with the thugs, and the added factor of Nightwing being around makes this mission's combat feel unique, and obviously it's always fun to be able to kick ass as not one, but 2 different members of the Bat family. The final combat section is also really cool. This is the second time you actually have a fist fight with Croc in the Arkham series, the first being back in Origins. And although his fight in Origins was a glorified tutorial, it really always used to stick out to me, and the same can be said for this fight. Not that this one is a glorified tutorial, but the fact it's memorable, and I think it cements Croc's legacy as one of the most underrated Arkham characters, because in my humble opinion, it's genuinely quite good, and Croc goes 3 for 3 in the memorable boss fight category. And I don't think that gets mentioned nearly enough. I'd be really interested to hear your guys' opinions on Croc in the Arkham series, because I feel like he never gets a bad outing particularly, but he never gets a overly amazing one. But anyway, the boss fight against Croc is pretty cool, and it's very reminiscent of the fight against Albert King in the movie studios. Croc takes a few dual team takedowns to, well, take down, and as far as this goes, it's quite cool seeing Batman and Nightwing work together to take out Croc over time. And the added factor of Croc being able to revive the thugs around him by just kind of picking them up is pretty cool. It doesn't feel too out of character for Croc to just force these guys back on their feet to try and stop the dynamic duo, and I think overall this boss fight is cool. And you can hit Croc with the most dangerous 3 letters in all of sports entertainment, an RKO. And that is really cool, because Randy Orton is a legend. A little feature I do like is that, much like usual thugs, you can actually dodge over and under Croc depending on his stance, and this can help create some separation between you and Jones as the fight goes on. And it's a nice little attention to detail. There isn't much more to this mission in terms of gameplay. The mission requires you to find 2 guards of Iron Heights in Gotham, which, if doing it for the first time, can be tricky, but upon repeat playthroughs, it's kind of just an inconvenience and that's about it. Overall, I think the gameplay is pretty standard for Arkham games as we've come to expect them. The combat is fun, and the fight against Croc is pretty cool, and it's by far the most in-depth fist fight we have with Croc, and easily his second best outing after the sort of hunter versus hunted dynamic got reversed in the Asylum. I also love the dual team gameplay, and it's fun to get more interactions on the combat side of things with the original Boy Wonder and the Dark Knight of Gotham. This gameplay is fun, the boss fight is good, and the overall vibe of the mission is good, and so for all of that, Beneath the Surface gets a respectable 7 out of 10. But how hard is this mission and the gameplay in general? Well, let's see. You get the drill by now, we're 3 videos in. We're going to be basing the difficulty out of 10. 1 is easy, 10 is hard, and we're using a baseline of a person who's played all the Arkham games once on hard, isn't overly great at the games, and likes to dabble in the Arkhamverse every now and then. And so for this episode, joining our difficulty alumni characters from previous videos, say hello to the Lizard. It only seemed right that we got Dr. Connors in on this episode, being the other highly recognisable, underrated lizard-based villain in comics. Things have been hard for Dr. Connors since the whole losing of the arm situation, and so the only time he can actually play these games is when he's the Lizard, which is pretty hard considering he's like 10 feet tall and his hands are like 8 times the size of the controller. But he gets by. Anyway, let's see how hard this mission is. The hardest part of this mission, in my opinion, is hunting down the 2 guards who fled the ship when it crashed. The first one in particular. This still isn't really hard, but it's challenging on a first playthrough if you don't know exactly where you're looking. The first victim is harder because the second victim is surrounded by thugs, so he's a lot easier to find in detective mode. The other big talking point is the final boss fight against Croc, but in all honesty, I can't say this is particularly hard. It's challenging at points and Croc can charge at you, which I know caught me off guard a few times when I was locked in on keeping my combo up. The actual taking down of Croc is easy, and at this point in the story you'll have already done it before. It's as simple as a few dual team takedowns, followed by some well-timed punches and counters. The thugs surrounding Croc don't provide too much of a challenge either. There isn't a huge amount of variety in their weapons or armour, and this really just serves as a way to build your combo up for the dual team takedowns to get Croc down. There really isn't much going on here outside of combat. The combat is easy in the other sections and doesn't really warrant a mention. It's simple Arkham combat and it remains fun and feels good. Overall, Beneath the Surface is fairly easy, and Lizard over here wouldn't see this as a big challenge as he does actually just playing the game due to his enlarged claws. And although this section has been really short, there just isn't that much to mention it, and for that reason, for difficulty, Beneath the Surface gets a lackluster 5 out of 10. Overall, Beneath the Surface serves as a final good send-off for everyone's favourite mutated crocodile, and despite its fairly easy nature, it manages to make Croc feel like more of a poorly treated human than a bloodthirsty mutant, and I think this is great. The story of this mission is much better than the gameplay. Although the gameplay isn't bad, it would have been nice, and I'm just dreaming here, I'm not a game designer, to maybe have a callback to his Asylum boss fight where we'd have to sneak around the ship at one point or he'd jump out at us and rip our ears off. Saying all that, I do really like this side mission. I like the sort of atmosphere it gives in the prison. I like the feeling of you hunting down Killer Croc, which is obviously a complete 180 from when he was hunting you down. And for that reason, it's been given a total of 20 out of 30 when all the scores are combined together. It's a little lackluster for Wayland's final outing in the Arkhamverse thus far, but it's still a fairly respectable score. The next side mission up on the chopping block was Wonderland, the Mad Hatter side mission, and this video was one that I have to admit was pretty rushed. I was in the middle of making the Batman Arkham Asylum retrospective, and this video didn't get the love it deserved, so I'm happy that I can kind of re-upload it here, and hopefully you enjoy. So, let's jump into the rabbit hole. Let's start with the story as per the usual. The story begins when Batman gets called to GCPD to talk to Jervis Tetch, who handed himself in and demanded he talk to Gotham's Dark Knight. And Aaron Cash tells us he's also taken hostages. Upon arrival to the interrogation room, we find Tetch sat there, and Batman begins interrogating him, but in typical Hatter fashion, he starts speaking in rhymes and mystery. But when Batman puts his foot down, Hatter tells Batman that if he pricks up his ears and listens to the siren's song, he'll find his Alice before too long. Basically, Batman has to listen to police car sirens to find the hostages. So Batman heads out into the city and listens out for the modified sirens of 3 police cars around Gotham. He finds the first hostage on the Lady of Gotham Island, just over the lake from the GCPD. He turns his detective mode on and finds that the officer is in the trunk of the car, but it's rigged to blow if it's opened. So he uses the cryptographic sequencer to disarm the bomb and save the hostage from that awful wailing noise. And obviously the fate of being blown into 1,000 pieces. And upon opening the trunk, he finds Officer Katz wearing a Cheshire Cat mask. The Mad Hatter's really funny. He talks to Katz, and the confused officer tells Batman he basically remembers nothing about how he got there. But there's no time to waste, so Batman heads out to find the next victim, this time at the Gotham City Lighthouse. It's the same situation as before. The car's blaring a modified siren out and the trunk is rigged to blow. Batman disarms the bomb and finds Officer McQueen wearing a Queen of Hearts mask. Again, the Mad Hatter's funny. The main antagonist in the original Alice in Wonderland story was the Queen of Hearts, so it makes sense she's here. And in the same vein as Officer Katz, she has no idea how she got in the back of the car. Batman heads off to find the final victims, but on arrival, he finds no one in the trunk, but a book that Jervis wants returning to him. It turns out Sergeant Laurie, the final victim, just showed back up at the precinct intact and fine. Batman's confused, but heads back to the lockup to return Hat's book to him. Batman's furious with Jervis and tries to get him to tell him where the last hostage is, but Tetch just tells Batman to open the book and he'll find him. When he opens the book, Batman is mind controlled by Hatter as a paper pop-up page of Arkham Asylum appears, and Batman tumbles into it, having to protect the final hostage from a group of Asylum thugs before the page begins turning and Batman rescues the hostage and gets transported into a pop-up page resembling Arkham City. The officer runs away, but Batman remains outside and fights off Joker's thugs and Tiger Guards from Arkham City, before again grabbing the hostage as the page begins turning for the final time, where he grapples up and over the page into a new scene, this time the story of Batman Arkham Knight. After fighting some militia forces and a few thugs, the officer comes out to fight Batman, but Batman avoids harming him in the fight and rips his mask off, saving Officer Hutch, he's wearing the rabbit mask, from this nightmare. Back in the real world, and upon realising his plan has failed, Hatter cowers in a corner, but Batman dishes out some good old-fashioned justice and throws him in a cell, putting an end to the night's rabbit hole and making sure Jervis doesn't try and find another Alice. Overall, I quite like this story. It's short, sweet, and hits all the notes a Mad Hatter story should. I've never been a big Mad Hatter fan purely because I find Alice in Wonderland to be creepy as all hell, but I think Jervis gets a nice outing here. If you look past the fact he's an awful, awful person and one of the few villains I genuinely think Batman hates, Jervis is actually quite a funny and intriguing character here. His speech pattern's really good and his constant rhymes and poems are actually quite fun to hear as you go throughout the mission. I also love the fact that each officer shares a namesake with the mask they were made to wear. Katz wearing a Cheshire Cat mask, McQueen wearing a Queen of Hearts, and Hutch wearing a White Rabbit mask. I think it's one of those nice little touches that make these Arkham games so cool. I also love that final section where you fight through the Asylum, City and Night sections, but it was sad not to see Origins get a look in, considering it's probably Mad Hatter's best outing in the series. I love the little Easter eggs you can find here, and the fact that you have to fight against the appropriate villains. It's a fun little visual change that strikes that nostalgic chord that old fans love, and it keeps the new fans engaged with the changing environment. Overall, I do like this story, and it's simple but well done execution. And for the reasons I've listed above, I'm going to give Wonderland a solid 7 out of 10. It's nothing flashy, but I think it does exactly what you'd want from a good Mad Hatter story. So let's see how the gameplay stacks up here, because personally, I think this mission's a bit of a wild card when it comes to its mechanic. The gameplay in Wonderland is really fun. Hunting the officers down is fun, and the sirens blaring as you try to locate them throughout the city gives off serious Professor Pig vibes with the opera music. It's a fun little sequence which thankfully doesn't get boring due to its limited inclusion in this mission, and when you get to the officers, I think the little mini game you play on the remote hacking device to disarm the bombs by hitting the little circles with the lines is quite fun. It's nothing too out there, but the fact it isn't just a code or something like that and it attempts to mix things up is pretty cool, and it adds something unique which, to my knowledge, we don't see this type of hacking sequence in any other missions, so that's pretty cool. Then I guess the final thing to talk about in this section is the book sequence. I really like this sequence, and that's probably just put down to the nostalgia baiting of putting us back in the realms of Asylum and City, but the fact we get to go back to those games in some capacity, even if for a short time, to fight those types of enemies, is really cool, and something I remember being really excited about when I played through this the first time around all those years ago. It's cool fighting the Asylum inmates again and having to work through them, and the same with the Joker thugs and Tiger enemies. I also like the little Easter eggs scattered about to other events in these games, like the Arkham Knight section when a cardboard cutout of Man-Bat pops up to remind you of that time that everyone collectively crapped themselves. I also like the fact that in the final section, the officer you're trying to save begins fighting you. It's a small thing, but it adds an element of danger and worry into these segments, because although he's mind-controlled, you don't want to be crippling an innocent police officer. I know it's just like the Riddler thugs that you can find out in the open world, but it's still pretty cool to see this idea being brought into a mission and given consequences, and the game over screen if you do hurt him is actually quite sad.
Batman, why?
Well, you found him. Victim 3. You're homicidal, just like me. Look back on this, and you will find how madness lurks in every mind.
Overall, the gameplay here isn't too varied. It's pretty simple in terms of Arkham gameplay, but that isn't really a bad thing because there's enough variation to keep you entertained. It doesn't really have any negatives, nor does it have any standout gameplay features or mix-up in terms of the types of things you do. It's okay, you do some hacking, you do some fighting, and to be fair, that's about it. I'd go as far to say as this mission's gameplay though is pretty good. Combat's always fun in these games, and the little mini-game with the bombs, like I said, is pretty fun. Again, nothing too special, but it mixes up this sort of thing pretty well. Overall, Wonderland is pretty good in terms of gameplay, and for that reason, and its distinct lack of negative aspects, it gets a 7 out of 10 again. A decent score for a decently balanced and enjoyable experience. But how difficult is this gameplay? Well, let's see. As usual, we'll be using a baseline of a player who's played all the Arkham games on hard to find out how difficult this mission is. This takes any skill that I may or may not have out of the equation, which gives us a much fairer score. This time around, since Alice in Wonderland freaks me out, I thought I'd ask someone that doesn't freak me out to be our baseline here. So say hello to this Space Marine. He's pretty chill, but the giant armour and general frame does hinder his ability to play the game, but he's pretty good at them overall. So how hard is this mission like? Well, I think our Space Marine here wouldn't really have too much trouble with it overall. The sections where you find the police officers aren't too hard, although I have to admit there have been a few times where I've personally completely blanked on where the second officer is, which is really stupid because Mad Hatter will outright tell you if you ask. Not that this Space Marine has these types of issues, because he actually pays attention to these sort of things and wears headphones when he plays. The little hacking sequence isn't too hard either. If anything, it's actually more satisfying than hard. Making the little balls disappear is quite fun in fairness, so I wouldn't say this is too difficult overall, but it gets a point for being, say, generally quite satisfying. Finally, the combat section. The combat sections aren't that hard for the Marine. The enemy variety is pretty steady, but there's enough there to make you think when you're stringing together your combos together. I think this bit is built on its set dressing and setting, because it excels so well at this, and it gives off huge amounts of like classic Arkham Asylum vibes, which is quite good. But overall, I think this mission is fairly easy. A bit like a couple of other missions in the Season of Infamy DLC, it's a mission built on its characters, more specifically in our case, Mad Hatter, and its overall vibes, and I think it does pretty well at this. I like the different types of missions we have here. The finding of the cops is fun, and like I said before, the little mini-game to disarm the bombs is probably my favourite part of this mission, and that's why I've spoken about it so much, because I just think it's really fun. I genuinely think this Marine would get through this mission fairly easily, while having just about as much fun as he would cutting down Xenos scum. Overall, I think Wonderland garners an average 6 out of 10 here. It's not overly hard, it's not too easy, it's pretty average. But overall, when we combine all the scores together, Wonderland gets a healthy 20 out of 30, which, I'm going to be honest with you, is a lot more than I thought it would get before I wrote this script. It's a respectable score as well, considering the amount of time we get in this mission, it coming in at around 20 minutes for a full playthrough. I think this mission's pretty fun, and it gives a villain that the Arkham games seem to have a pretty weird soft spot for plenty of time to shine, and I think his performance was great here. I love the callbacks to his previous missions and appearances, and think this is definitely one of the more underrated missions within the Season of Infamy DLC pack's ranks.
But what about the open world side missions? Well, that's where the Militia occupation missions come in, and these are some of the best missions in the game, without a doubt. Definitely some of the most fun, and the most that make you, and I hate to say it, feel like Batman. So, let's get into them, shall we? The story of these missions are all intertwined, so let's cover that first. Scarecrow wanted to take over Gotham, and the Arkham Knight Militia had the manpower and technology to do that, while making it extremely hard for Batman to navigate and survive in, flipping the city's power dynamic on its head. The Militia set up guard towers on the roofs to nullify Batman's aerial presence, command posts around the ground to occupy different streets, and bombs are placed around the city to ensure that no outside presence interferes with the Knight's proceedings. See, he isn't stupid, and there is a law reason Batman doesn't call in help. And finally, the Arkham Knight's lieutenants are placed in armoured APCs to protect them should they be pursued by Batman at any point in the night. After taking down the Knight and taking out the ground outposts, the Militia covering the sky, and the bombs around the city, and no, I'm not forgetting anything, I never realised this, but you don't actually need to take out the Knight's lieutenants to finish this mission line. Although, obviously, for a 100% playthrough, you do need to do these. But after doing the missions I mentioned, and completing the main story, the new mysterious leader of the Militia, later revealed to be Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke, will challenge Batman to a fight. A rematch that's been in the making for a decade at this point. The two gladiators once fought in the gut of the final offer, and now meet on a city-wide It's a tank fight. Yeah, it's the Deathstroke boss battles, it's a tank fight. Slade brings some Cobra tanks and talks shit over the mic for 5 minutes before making his move, when his tank is blown up, leaving himself open to a good old one-tap from the Dark Knight, being taken into GCPD lockup with all of his gear still on him. That's the story, really. The story here is intertwined with the beginning of the game's main story, and quite frankly, I quite like this setup for this game. What I don't like is Deathgoat's miserable use here. I appreciate Rocksteady couldn't keep you doing these missions before you finished the main story, so I had to put a placeholder leader of the Militia in here, but why did we have to waste Deathstroke on this mission? And actually, and more pertinent, why did he have to be used this way? I don't have a problem with Slade being the commander here. It could have been a unique way to have the rematch of the decade between the Dark Knight of Gotham and Deathstroke the Terminator. A fight across the rooftops or a street level brawl. But no, we have to fight him in a tank. It speaks to a wider issue of the tank's use in this game, something I covered in my retrospective on the game, but overall it just fell flat at the last hurdle. Overall, I like the setup and reasoning of the different outposts and bombs around the city, but sadly the use and complete disgrace of an outing that Deathstroke gets here brings its score down a huge amount. So I think I'll give this a 5 out of 10. It's okay, the reasoning for all of this stuff being here is fun and makes sense lore-wise, but Slade just being one-tapped really doesn't sit well with me at all. The gameplay here though is great. Over the course of the 4 different overworld missions, you'll use stealth, combat, Batmobile, and all kind of gadgets to clear the city of Militia threat. So let's see what we have to do here. Own the Roads consists of the Militia planting ground forces around the city in little bases, or big bases depending on the amount of guns and men housed within. Usually these are combat encounters, but a few require some stealth or pre-planning to get into. And after all the enemies have been defeated and the area is secure, you have to find the checkpoint commander and destroy his remote to bring the walls down and clear the area. Campaign for Disarmament sees loads of these deeply implanted bombs scattered around Gotham, under the threat of being blown up if any outside forces interfere with the Knight's plans. Hence the exclusion of the Army, the Justice League, or any other bit of help a Bat could possibly require from outside the limits of Gotham City. These bombs actually spawned one of the most hilariously overused and funny lines in the Arkham franchise to date.
The bomb's payload is exposed. I could use the power wrench to trigger a controlled explosion.
You can either hack these bombs on foot or in the Batmobile, but the tanks that come your way afterwards have to be dealt with in the car. The amount of enemies sent after you change depending on the bomb. So one bomb might see 6 tanks come after you, and the next might see 36 come after you. It changes per bomb, but the general challenge remains the same. It's a tank fight, so all of the different facets of the tank forces seen in the story are seen here too, which makes these sections quite challenging. On to Occupy Gotham, and this set of objectives sees the Knight's forces take the rooftops of Gotham, with men, turrets and outposts scattered around the city. To take these down, it can vary between a stealth section and combat, but mostly the layout of the mission remains the same. Find the outposts, take down the enemies guarding them by the correct means, and then destroy the checkpoint control panel, shutting down the turret or any hope of rebuilding another checkpoint in its place. Finally, for the open world missions at least, Armoured and Dangerous sees various militia lieutenants scattered around the city in various armoured personnel carriers, which are flanked by multiple militia support vehicles, and in a Mad Max style car chase, great game by the way, Batman has to take down the APC and the lieutenant within it. The support vehicles are optional because if you take the APC out before the support, they'll just cut their losses and retreat, realising they don't really stand a chance against the Batmobile's firepower. Probably a smart move, all things considered. You take the cars and APC down by simply ramming them or using the Batmobile's homing missile. It's fairly simple if you can keep them in your line of sight. And finally, the boss fight. Deathstroke shows up in a specialised tank. It's basically the Cloudburst from the main campaign, and he comes with several Cobra tanks. This fight plays out pretty much beat for beat the way the Cloudburst fight in the main story does. You take down the Cobra tanks by flanking them and firing a shot into their exhaust port, and then to take down Slade's tank, you just shoot the shit out of it with the Batmobile's weaponry, and when he jumps out to fight you hand to hand, Batman just squashes him. After Bat Hogan gets his way and takes Slade back to the GCPD, the mission ends. The gameplay for these missions overall is probably the best in the game. It challenges every single part of your skill set. It makes you think about how to tackle a lot of these missions, and some parts require some serious pre-planning to get the most out of them. The sheer amount of content here between these 4 missions is also great. Obviously, this is a bit different than any of my other rankings, because we're ranking technically 4 separate missions here rather than 1, so there's a lot to go at. But overall, the missions feel big enough to take some time and skill, but not overbearing like the Riddler challenges, for example. And I think it's a great balance between enough to make it a challenge, but not enough to turn the player away from ever completing them. I also think as a group and individually, each mission is fun. It's a testament to the work Rocksteady did refining the controls and smoothing the gameplay out, that doing a variation of the 4 same missions is quite fun. It might not be up your street when it comes to the Batmobile sections, but personally, I have no issue with the Panzer Bat 4. So in all honesty, I have very little to complain about these here, and I think these missions keep the player busy, serve the immersion of the world well, and although the final boss fight is a huge letdown, The core missions and what we're all here for are fun, and so for that I'm going to give a, maybe controversial, 8 out of 10. Finally, how difficult are they? Well, as per usual, we'll be using the baseline of someone who's played the Arkham games once before on hard, and have a decent skill level at these games, taking any skill I may or may not have out of the equation. So, for this episode, adding to our mission ranking alumni, alongside Lego Killer Croc, Ham, this Space Marine, Judge Holden, and the Lizard, say hello to the best in the world, the voice of the voiceless, the straight-edge superstar, Chunky Monkey Punk. Okay, let it slide. Alright, I'm running out of people here, and I'm trying to see what you guys like, so tell me if there's, like, anyone here who wants a WWE video one day. I'd quite enjoy making that. Please, someone, just one person, just go, yeah, you can make it, and I promise I'll make it.
You are so washed. Not washed, you're...
Charles Manson Punk might have actually played the Arkham games before. I don't know him. It's a lot easier to make jokes when the people you pick aren't real, but ever since they added CM Punk's old theme tune back into WWE 2K24, I have been on an absolute warpath with that man in exhibition mode. And so, for the sake of this video, we're going to assume that Combustible Marquisio is a huge Arkham fan, and run with it. As their own individual missions, the only mission that stands out to Cheese Macaroni Punk as hard is probably Campaign for Disarmament, due to the tank battles becoming pretty crowded from time to time, especially when the bomb is in a tight alley or location, and the militia decide to roll out 45 different tanks to take you down. The rest of these missions, including the final boss fight, are all things that we as the player has done before, and things that Campaign for Disarmament Punk is familiar with by this stage in his Arkham career. So as long as you plan ahead for certain sections and don't get completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of missions available here, even the most bumbling Dork Knight should probably be able to get through these missions fairly easily. Some of the rooftop missions outposts do cause some issues for a player of Chick Magnet Punk's status, due to the placement of the turrets and the different varieties of enemies. But the rest of these missions here pose little to no threat if you're smart with how you go about tackling them. It's also worth mentioning the APC chases are easy on any difficulty, so I'm not even going to really warrant them with any sort of review. Overall, this entire set of missions is more of a slog to get through because of sheer quantity, rather than the difficulty on display. And so I think that career mode Punk would be able to clear them out fairly easily in all honesty. Maybe dying once or twice along the way due to unforeseen shotgun blast to the face, or trying to take down an anti-air missile with a GTS. So myself and Curious Morge Punk have come together and decided to bestow a fair 6 out of 10 on the Militia takeover missions, leaving the Militia's hostile takeover and occupation of Gotham in general with a pretty healthy 19 out of 30 when we combine all the scores together. Overall, the Militia do a great job at occupying Gotham. It's a great way to introduce all of these different side missions without having them feel like a big mess. It feels in line with the story, and more importantly, it gives the player a great excuse to play with most, if not all, of the Dark Knight's gadgets, and gives the game time to shine and spread its leather wings outside of the main story and other heavily story-based side content, which this game has quite a lot of. I think these missions are, for the most part, pretty fun. They can be tackled at any point in the game, whether that be before or after the main story once they've become available, and allow for the player to explore and take back Gotham City piece by piece, in a way which feels faithful to the franchise in terms of execution and delivery. So remember at the start of that last video I said I hadn't completed Gunrunner on that save file? Well, I remember soon after completing that video, I went and completed Gunrunner on that save file. So let's have a look how Penguin stacks up to the other side missions, shall we? The story begins with Dick Grayson, Nightwing, wanting to meet Bruce on the rooftop of the Raleigh Ferry Terminal. Nightwing's been tracking down the Penguin's illicit firearm smuggling business, which is being ran through a front business of North Refrigeration. He invites Batman to meet up and break up a deal and track one of the North Refrigeration trucks back to one of Penguin's hideouts. The former dynamic duo discuss the mission at hand, and Nightwing hands Batman a prototype disruptor, which has a tracker in it. Batman also tells Dick to go back to Bloodhaven, presumably due to the kidnapping of Oracle in this point in the story, and not wanting to lose another sidekick. Dick refuses and Batman tags the truck and begins tracking the scared thugs back to their first hideout. After breaking into the hideout and finding the first weapon cache, Batman is held captive and taunted by Penguin before Nightwing makes the save and helps Bruce out, taking the thugs out in a huge combat section as the Penguin escapes. Batman uses the explosive gel on the weapon cache and blows the first batch of the weapons up. Nightwing tells Batman that despite Batman not wanting his help and having his concerns, he's needed as much as he is in Bloodhaven, Gotham's neighbouring city, as he is in Gotham tonight, because Penguin's guns are on the streets in his city, and so to stop that, he's needed here. Batman reluctantly agrees and lets Nightwing tell him the location of the North refrigeration trucks to be tracked to more hideouts. Nightwing then feeds information to Bruce regarding 3 more caches, doing the same trick as before, tagging a van and following it back to a cache before taking down the thugs guarding it with Nightwing's help, and then blowing the weapons up using the explosive gel, until, after taking down one of the caches and Nightwing doesn't help out, Nightwing reveals that he's actually got Penguin right where he wants him. He's been taken hostage by the Penguin, which is what will happen to you if you don't subscribe, and now he needs to be saved. Batman follows Nightwing's tracker and finds he's being held in the Amatec building in Otisburg. He infiltrates the building and finds Nightwing being heavily guarded by Penguin's thugs, who are taunting him and beating him. Batman eventually finds a route in and smashes through the wall, saving Nightwing, as the pair launch into action and begin taking down Penguin's thugs in a huge fight. Working together, the pair take down Nightwing's captors, and assuming that this is the last cache, Batman heads into the weapons vault, sprays the explosive gel, and as he's about to blow the final weapons up, Penguin takes Nightwing at gunpoint, and Dick begins telling Oswald about the Flying Graysons and how good they were, before elbowing Penguin and setting him up to be slammed down by Batman, before Bruce pins Oswald down and blows the final weapon cache up, much to the dismay and angry outrage of the Penguin, before Bruce shuts him up completely. Here we get one of the most emotional scenes in the game. Knowing he won't, or at least Batman won't survive the night, Bruce tells Dick he's proud of him. Dick brushes this off before realising how serious Bruce is being, and the Dark Knight tells his protege to keep Bloodhaven safe, and Nightwing promises to do that, but grapples away. Batman puts Cobblepot in the back of the Batmobile and takes him to the GCPD, throwing him in a cell with the rest of Gotham's Most Wanted, while he berates his former partner in crime, Two-Face, for their combined failure. The story of Gunrunner is a simple one. It's a good one though. The Penguin's a character that I've always had mixed feelings on, sometimes finding him to be a bit one-dimensional and dull, but this story was fun. It gave plenty of time for characters to shine, especially Cobblepot himself, who is one of the funniest characters in this game, talking to his men in a way that only he could. Nightwing's involvement here is good too. It expands the Arkhamverse to Bloodhaven, which is now clearly turf that typically Gotham-based villains operate in, and it was good to know that Rocksteady wanted to make this known. The dynamic between Bruce and Dick is also great. It's exactly what you'd expect, but the fact Nightwing is established as his own hero, and Bruce knows that the end of his time as a hero is near the end, really makes this feel like an unofficial passing of the torch, despite Nightwing being placed in Bloodhaven. The story presents a great ending as well. It's emotional and strikes a chord that only the impending death of a beloved hero could. No matter when you complete the mission line, Batman talks like he knows it's the end, and speaks to Nightwing accordingly, telling him he's proud of him and instructing him to keep Bloodhaven safe. It's a short exchange, but one that tells you enough to know tonight's the night Batman dies. Whether it be the myth or the man, tonight will change Batman and thus his family forever. Overall, given the decent story, Penguin's great showing, and the extended relationship shown between an established Nightwing and a veteran Batman who's nearing the end of the road, I find it quite hard to knock this story. It could have given Penguin more actual screen time, but that might just be a bit greedy of me to ask. So overall, Gunrunner's story gets a very respectable 8 out of 10, ranking it against the other side missions, and it's one of the better storylines in this game. It has backstory, emotional stakes, and most importantly, a good overarching narrative, albeit a simple one. So, now we know what the story of the mission is like, let's take a look at the gameplay. The gameplay of Gunrunner boils down to 4 things. tracking the vans back to the weapon caches, breaking into the cache, taking down the thugs guarding it, and then blowing the weapons up. This is a fun loop for the most part. The start of each mission where you have to follow the van back to the cache is pretty cool, although sometimes the henchmen seem to take the longest possible route to the cache, which is both quite funny and the most annoying thing ever. You have to make sure Batman isn't spotted on your way back to the cache, which means you have to hang back just enough to lure them into a false sense of security, but keep your eyes on them so they don't get away. Once you get to the caches, each area has its own little challenge to get inside, whether it be a lone sniper, a Batmobile challenge, a combat section, or even a fully fleshed out stealth section. This provides an extra level of planning when you eventually get to the caches, and some of these sections are genuinely quite tricky. Nothing we haven't done before at this point in the story, but still enough to, for the most part, make you think strategically. Upon entering the caches, you get thrust into giant combat sections of various sizes and enemy variety, which, with the added mechanic of Nightwing, combines to create a really varied and fun experience until Nightwing is captured, which even then leaves us with a fun difference in gameplay for this mission, because all of the missions up until the point Nightwing's captured, we've been doing this work with help, but then we're just thrown in by ourselves. It's not much, but it's a fun mix-up, and I do genuinely think the gameplay for these missions is great. It keeps a strong sense of familiarity, but does enough to keep each encounter feeling different, and with the added character of Nightwing and the combat sections that come with that, it all feels fresh and fun despite the repetitive structure of the missions. One thing I'm always a little conflicted on is whether to give marks up or down for the staggered progression this game does a lot. For example, this mission requires you to go through the main story to unlock the next call from Nightwing, alerting you to the location of the North refrigeration trucks. I do think it's good that you can't just blitz through the story, and it makes sense canonically that Nightwing wouldn't just find these trucks to track instantly, and it's really not an issue for this mission in particular. But it's an interesting point that I never quite know whether to bring up, but just know that here, it works. So, in conclusion, the gameplay for this mission line is great. It's fun, varied, tests all of your skills, use most of your gadgets, and it doesn't rely too heavily on the Batmobile, which is a bonus for Night. And the inclusion of the tag team gameplay with Nightwing is great. It's always fun to fight alongside a member of the Bat family in this game, so for those reasons, it gets a 9 out of 10. It's nearly perfect. There's a case for it being perfect in all honesty, but given the lack of stealth sections within the caches and not just outside, it just misses out on a 10. Although, again, this is debatable. But alas, how difficult is this mission? Well, let's see. Difficulty is a sliding scale, so as per the previous ratings, I'm going to use a stand-in of someone who's played all the Arkham games on hard once, and is decent enough to take only a few hits per encounter. An above average player, so to speak. And so for this episode, I thought I'd fit someone fitting to join our previous alumni, as this video is coming out on Halloween. So say hello to Hannibal Lecter, world-renowned pro gamer, cannibal, and Arkham lawmaster. So let's see how difficult this is. Hannibal starts off by tracking the vans and finds this fairly easy. It's easy to tag the van as it's stationary, and as long as he's good with traversal, which, with all that time practicing in silence, he's able to track the vans relatively easy and heads inside the cache after completing the little challenge to get in. Lecter is good at stealth and combat, so gets in pretty easily. After getting inside, it boils down to straight combat, whether it be with Nightwing or not. Lecter finds this challenging due to the huge amount of enemies and the variety of weapons they have, but the added bonus of having an instant takedown at the ready with Nightwing at hand makes taking down the various brutes pretty easy for a man of his talents and ability. But the sheer number of enemies and the sheer variety of them bumps the difficulty up a fair bit when compared to other missions, and the entire mission line revolves around this type of combat section as the main part of the mission line, so there's no real trouble in describing the differences in difficulty per section, as they're all basically just slowly increasing in enemy numbers and variety, and obviously spraying the whole explosive gel on the weapons is no challenge. The whole mission line's pretty easy for Hannibal, and there's no evaluation needed to see his natural ability when it comes to taking down the thugs and gunrunners of Gotham City. I do wish this section could be longer, but I need to make this quick because I'm having an old friend for dinner later. So overall, Gunrunner gets an 8 out of 10 for difficulty. In comparison to other side missions, the sheer number of enemies and the weapons and environmental hazards that surround them do make for a pretty decent challenge as the mission goes on, and it's a great level of difficulty for a great mission line. Overall, Gunrunner ends with a highly respectable 25 out of 30, putting it in the upper echelon of side missions in Batman Arkham Knight. Gunrunner is a great mission line. Lengthwise, it's long enough to feel fulfilling and complete, but short enough to not overstay its welcome. It holds a great line between being a story-driven bit of side content with a clear and enjoyable narrative that expands the Arkham universe, with the implications of Oswald's crime extending to and affecting Bloodhaven, which adds some stakes outside of Gotham, however far away those stakes may seem given the size of Gotham and the amount of missions in this game, and a fun sort of beat-em-up style mission line. I really like this mission despite the fact I've never been a huge fan of Penguin as a villain, which goes to show this mission's undeniable quality and overall fun aspect. The actual mission structure's fun as well, and the various large combat sections are really cool, because combat both solo and tag team is great here, and this mission gives you plenty of that to go through. Tracking the vans is fun and makes you really use your wings to explore Gotham and find the caches by staying just about out of sight of the vans. Enough about the Penguin, what about Ra's al Ghul in his side mission Shadow War, which as it stands is his final outing in the Arkham series, but as we all know, Ra's doesn't stay dead for too long, does he? The story of Shadow War begins when Alfred tells Batman that an officer has spotted some quote-unquote crazy-ass ninjas jumping and fighting across the rooftops of Gotham City. So Batman heads to investigate said crazy-ass ninjas. When he arrives at the scene of the fight reported, Batman sees 2 dead League of Shadows members and does some classic detective work to deduce there are actually 3 ninjas here, and 1 escapes, and so tracks a left behind blood trail of a 3rd ninja all the way to the Elliott Memorial Hospital. Upon breaking into the hospital, we find League loyalists being trained, and we butt in and stop their training before trying to turn on the power. But the power's off, so we use the remote Batmobile control and turn on the backup generator, granting the Dark Knight access to the lower floors of Elliott Memorial. Upon getting to the bottom floor of the hospital, an eerie scene unfolds. The corridor is plastered with bodies, strung up, dead in a pile, all dead, apart from 1. But Batman heads through to the morgue and finds another dead ninja, some more detective work, and works out she was trying to press buttons in a specific order to access a door. He follows the pattern and opens the door, leading to a huge chamber with a throne-like centrepiece in the background of the room. In the throne, connected to tubes and wiring, sits Ra's al Ghul, dying and being kept alive by the Lazarus he's abused for so many centuries. League members tell Batman he must heal Ra's to shift the tides of the ongoing stalemate between the League loyalists and the Break-Off Rebellion group who think Ra's time in charge is over. Ra's pleads with Batman, even using his fallen daughter, Talia, as a bargaining chip to make Batman comply and bring him back to power. Batman heads out to find a pure strain of Lazarus, enough to bring Ra's back, and so sets the Batmobile scanner to locate the source down. Batman heads into the chamber when he finds the source and begins extracting some Lazarus, before being interrupted by rebel assassins, led by Nyssa Ratko, Ra's other daughter and sister of Talia al Ghul, who puts Batman in a difficult position. Kill Ra's and end his reign of terror, or keep him alive, following his own moral code, but leaving the consequences of Ra's being alive, given the amount of time he'll have to heal back to full power, causing unknown amounts of pain and agony. Batman heads back to the hospital and turns to Alfred for help. Does he refuse to give Ra's the cure, thus killing him, or restore him to full power, maintaining his oath to never take a life, but bringing one of his greatest foes back to full strength? Alfred actually does point out that technically Ra's is already dead, and thus not giving him the Lazarus wouldn't be killing him, so to speak, just not saving him, which is an entirely different conversation we'll have in a bit. But Batman heads down to the chamber to make his choice. Depending on the choice you make here, Batman will either administer the Lazarus and end up fighting the rebel assassins, which ends with Nyssa being killed by Ra's, but in the aftermath of this, averting an all-out war as both factions seem to leave Gotham. On the flip side, if Batman decides to withhold the cure and let Ra's die, the Loyalists fight Batman, and after he takes them out, Nyssa prepares to kill what she describes as what's left of her father, but Batman talks her down and takes Ra's into custody at the GCPD. Ra's tells Batman he's proud of him, and the curtain closes on Ra's al Ghul, his final few days spent in GCPD lockup. Wow, so where do I even start with this? Well, I think it's obvious enough given the ending and the choice you're presented with. The story itself is great, and the ending is intriguing. It presents the question of whether letting someone willingly die is killing them. Is standing by as someone takes their last breaths while you stand there with the power to save them, killing them? Well, by all accounts, this game presents the choice to save Ra's as the right one. It preserves Batman's no-kill rule, but at the same time, by that logic, he broke this rule underneath the Monarch Theatre back in Arkham City when the Joker drew his last breaths. Batman says he would have saved him, but here you can actually kind of prove whether Batman actually would have saved him, depending on your final choice in this mission, which is a nice little callback. If left to die, Bruce will actually carry Ra's body out of the hospital like he carries Joker out. I could honestly make an entire video on this mission and this choice by itself, because it brings up some great conversations about Batman's code, what the morally correct choice is, and more stuff like that. It's great and lends a huge amount of conversation and interest to all the characters involved. Tell me in the comments what you did or what you think the right choice is. Personally, I'm of the view that Batman does not kill. Whether or not he kills Ra's by not saving him is a whole other topic. But anyway, this mission also wraps up Ra's and the League's inclusion in the Arkhamverse, and serves as a great way to make sure they get a fun and respectful ending, which changes drastically depending on your choice, but still keeps in line with the lore and feel of these games. It's really good, and it introduces Nyssa, although for a short time, which is cool. Brings back Ra's, who was great in City, and brings emotional stakes around Bruce's mourning over Talia's death. Overall, for me, the story of this mission is great. It's really heavy, has deep emotional stakes, hard-hitting consequences, and brings up the ever-raging debate about Batman as a character himself and his moral code. So overall, Shadow War gets a 9 out of 10. It might be short and sweet lengthwise, but it serves as a great way to phase the League out of the Arkham universe one way or another, and is a mission people still discuss today regarding that final decision. So let's see how the gameplay stacks up and move on to that. But just before we do, I wanted to talk about the set designs here. This won't count for anything, as I don't think it ever has before, so I'm just going to talk about the designs and atmosphere of certain areas here. It's so quintessentially Arkham. This corridor here, under the hospital, well, I'll just let you watch and listen to this gameplay because it feels so Asylum-like. I think it's the lighting and the overall design of this corridor, but it just made me think of intensive treatment in Arkham Asylum. Also, in the chamber where the Lazarus is, there's a huge amount of that Arkham atmosphere. And it goes to show that, although that the series may have evolved and the atmosphere from Asylum may have died down, in the later installments especially, its impact can still be felt. And I did make a full video on Asylum. So I can't do that. Go watch the video, it's good. This and the Killer Croc mission both have insanely good atmosphere in certain areas, and again just goes to show that Arkham is built on its atmosphere and its designs, and in certain areas of this game, this shines through really well despite Night having a much more futuristic feel than the other games. Anyway, the gameplay in Shadow War actually begins in a way which is very reminiscent to finding the League for the first time in Arkham City. You find the ninjas and then have to track one of the League's hideouts by following their blood trail across the city. This was a nice little callback and takes you around the island, meaning you have to use a lot of on-foot movement, which is really fun. We're also fighting a few thugs on the way to the hospital, which again it's always alright. After getting to the hospital, there's a little combat section which has ninjas involved, which is always a tricky mix-up personally. Their attack pattern is different and their whole movement is a lot different, and added to the fact these can actually dodge some of your attacks, and these guys are an issue. A little Batmobile puzzle later and a Batarang puzzle down below, and we find ourselves doing more detective work in the morgue, where, completely unrelated, there's a ton of Easter eggs. The bodies of the lady who serve you at the diner at the start of the game, the body of the man who alerts you to the smoker in the corner in Paulie's diner at the start of the game, and most notably, an empty freezer labelled Talia al Ghul. An interesting lot of Easter eggs which make absolutely no difference to gameplay, but they're still there, and I didn't know where else to put them in the video. We do some cool detective work here, which is quite tricky on a first playthrough, but it's still pretty cool. It's really Batman, it's great. Then the drive to find the Lazarus is pretty average Arkham Knight stuff. It's alright, but something we've done before in the story, and I'm sure a lot of people would just wish wasn't there, but it makes sense to do. Then the combat in the final 2 segments, in the chamber and in Raish's throne room, or whatever it's called, are really cool. The ninjas do these cool attacks, which are very reminiscent of the fights against the martial artists in Origins, with these long multi-attack sequences, which are really cool and a good mix-up. The sequences are so different from any other combat point in the game, and it just makes this mission feel really unique combat-wise. Overall, the gameplay here is pretty fun. It combines detective work, varied combat, and unique gameplay, and even a little bit of Batmobile gameplay, which all combines to make a really fun and enjoyable experience. Each part of the mission has its own unique gameplay element, and it just creates a really concise and unique experience as a package. I love the detective gameplay here. It begins very similar to City, which is a nice callback, and then there's the other part in the morgue, which is actually really fun. There's plenty of ways to mess up and play around with different combinations, and so when we look at the gameplay as a complete package, considering it only really lacks a stealth segment, which wasn't really expected anyway, I have to give Shadow War an 8 out of 10. It's fun, unique, and introduces features which I wish were in the main game, and in my opinion they just weren't used enough. And overall, the experience keeps the player on their toes, which again makes for a really fun experience. Anyway, let's see how difficult this is. Finally, the difficulty. Usual stuff, we're ranking this based on a player who's played the Arkham games once on hard, and is okay at the games, so for this video, we're using someone who has a very specific set of skills. Impressive to the untrained eye, Liam Neeson. I'm sure Liam Neeson loves the Arkham games. They've taken him a while to complete, although he's not on the A team of Arkham players, he's definitely still up there. The initial detective part following the blood trail can actually be pretty tricky if you don't know where to go from the jump. The trail leads you across all sorts of elevations and all sorts of rooftops across the island, and takes a fair bit of time to find where you have to be. The combat segments aren't too hard, but the ninjas are always an issue. One I tend to hate personally, but Obi-Wan over here is doing pretty good with this, dealing non-stop damage to build up his combos. The other detective section isn't too hard for a man of his skills. It's just common sense, and the game kind of walks you through this section pretty well, so it's a pretty easy task. The hardest part of this mission isn't actually gameplay related though, it's the choice at the end. For a man of many roles and many acts, Raish has decided whether Raish's life is worth saving or letting burn out. That's probably the most challenging part here, but overall the actual gameplay here isn't overly difficult. There are definitely a few smaller challenges, namely the remote Batarang challenge early on, and the opening detective work, which can cause some issue for the uninitiated, but nothing too serious. And for that reason, and everything I've said above, Shadow War gets a fairly decent 7 out of 10. A more challenging mission when compared to a lot of the other side missions in this game, but nothing overly outrageous to the point where you just can't complete it. Overall, Shadow War gets a 24 out of 30. A score that is fitting for the Demon's Head's final outing in this universe for now. Respectable, if nothing else. Shadow War for me is a great mission line. Its story combined with the varied gameplay and great ending all make for an unforgettable side mission, which tops off the Season of Infamy DLC very nicely. But what about a character who didn't get any love in the Arkham franchise, being cast aside as a side mission in Batman Arkham Knight in what should have been his crowning moment? Well, that's where Azrael steps in with his side mission, Heir to the Cowl. Heir to the Cowl begins when Batman's alerted to a burning bat symbol on a rooftop in Kingston. Batman goes to investigate and comes across Azrael, formerly GCPD officer Michael Lane, sat atop the rooftop in front of a burning bat symbol. The two engage in conversation, with Azrael stating that the day of Gotham falling he told him about back in Arkham City has finally arrived, and Gotham needs a Batman and Batman needs a successor, who's skilled enough to keep Gotham safe in the event of Batman's death. Batman lets Azrael take on a simulation of multiple enemies, the stipulation being he has to take down these enemies without being hit. If he's hit, he has to restart until he completes the trial. Batman uses these simulations to study Azrael and finds his fighting style is nearly an exact copy of his own from Alfred as the night goes on. Batman finds Azrael 3 more times, and keeps putting him through these increasingly tough challenges, all combat based, ranging from large groups of enemies with weapons to a group of militia ninjas, which Azrael manages to take down, proving himself worthy of the cowl should Batman perish one day. However, after the final challenge, Azrael states that Gotham needs Azrael now. Batman tells Azrael that that's not how this is going to work, and Azrael disappears before Alfred tells Batman he's found his real identity, a former GCPD officer called Michael Lane, who was discharged following several psychological issues as well as finding an irregularity in his physiology. Batman heads back to the clock tower to study Azrael, where he finds Lane has a chip implanted in his brain, which is subconsciously changing and altering his memories. The symbols found in these memories are that of the Order of Saint Dumas, who have brainwashed Michael into being their soldier. Batman finds all of the symbols and deciphers the message left within the symbols. The message tells Azrael to do what he spent his time doing as Azrael. Learn from Batman, study his every move, and when the day comes, take over the mantle, kill Batman, and protect Gotham as the Dark Knight does. Azrael breaks into the clock tower and Batman addresses him as Michael, his real name, and he gives him a choice. He either kills him or leaves and remembers who he really is. The player then takes control of Azrael and goes to grab his sword, which he handed over to Batman at the start of the mission. And here we can either kill Batman or seek revenge against the Order. If the player decides to kill Batman, Batman will sidestep him and take Azrael down, and then take him to GCPD lockup, bringing his journey to an end. If the player decides Azrael will come to his senses, Azrael will either snap the sword or completely leave it alone, making amends with Batman before heading on his hunt for redemption against the Order. Overall, I like this story, especially the last segment in the clock tower. It's a bit of a letdown considering Azrael's set up in Arkham City, but that seems to be a theme throughout this game, building our expectations high and then bringing them crashing right back down to earth. But as its own mission line, taking away any expectations, it's not that bad. It has a good, if not short, story, and we get some more information about Azrael, which is good because he's a really cool character who doesn't get enough limelight in mainstream media, so it was nice that he got a bit more here. I do have one gripe with this mission, but I know why this gripe exists, and it does have a reason for existing, but why would Batman choose this clearly mentally ill Knight of the Templar looking dude to be Gotham's protector based off of 4 combat challenges? Nightwing's in Bloodhaven, that makes sense, but Robin is still about, Oracle, although not physically fit, is still helping out, and if all else fails, Nightwing could do double duty with Robin across Gotham and Bloodhaven. I know that sounds like a lot of work, but in the state Batman leaves Gotham in after Arkham Knight, which seems to be a state of unprecedented peace, all of his villains are dead or locked up for a while. Is it really needed to have Azrael, who's genuinely a little unhinged, and as we know from the Nightfall story, has murderous intentions despite him telling Batman that he won't kill? It just doesn't seem to make sense he'd genuinely consider Azrael as the heir to the cowl and the cape. I'm not sure if I'm missing something really simple as to why he would consider this Watcher in the Wings as next in line, but it just never quite sat right with me. He doesn't prove himself as anything but a competent fighter. Half of Batman's work and skill set is his physical traits and feats, but the other half is his strategic mind, his detective work, his unmatched mental capacity, his iron will, and everything that goes with that. Things he'll have instilled into Dick and Tim from a young age, and things he doesn't know if Azrael has. It's always been a weird decision for me for Batman to take this proposition seriously. But I think if this had have gone further, he'd probably have vetted him further, or at least I hope he would. Given everything we've just mentioned, combined with the pretty meh follow-up to his introduction in City, Heir to the Cowl gets a lukewarm 5 out of 10. So, let's look at the gameplay. The gameplay of this mission is fairly straightforward. There's 4 combat sections, all of which have added stipulation of you, Azrael, not being allowed to be hit, or else you'll fail. This mission is really cool in that we get to play as a different character in Azrael. In theory, this is a great idea, but in practice, this is a reskinned Batman. Not a bad thing for familiarity's sake, but on the flip side, this kind of sucks. We get to control a seemingly more brutal and snappy Batman, but he controls the exact same and keeps the exact same moveset. This is explained in-game as Azrael having studied Batman's moveset since Arkham City, and he doesn't want to kill if Batman doesn't, and this does make sense. But it would have been nice to see some mix-up, maybe like in the final Joker section of the main story at the end of the game, where every now and then Batman's moveset is mixed in with Joker's more brutal fighting style. It would have been cool to see this, but with Azrael's own fighting style instilled in there somewhere. That would have been nice, but overall, this is pretty cool. These sections act like combat challenges more than anything else, and the added stipulation of not being allowed to be hit really puts you on edge. And the harder the sections get, the more gadgets, skills and takedowns you'll need to utilise to make sure you don't get hit, and that's pretty cool. The final section has an exclusively ninja-based contingency, and this section can be quite tough. It throws you off your usual combat style and makes you adapt to the more fluid and difficult ninjas. Each section does get increasingly harder, so it's nice to see Rocksteady just go, fuck it, and throw a group of these enemies at us, because I know for most people, including me, these guys are an issue. The final part of the mission is a detective mission, where you have to scrub through Azrael or Michael Lane's memories to find implanted symbols that were placed in his memories by the Order of Saint Dumas. This is a pretty cool section, and I think the music here deserves a special shout out. It's very angelic, I think. It's great. But yeah, this section is pretty cool. It requires some attention and is a nice ending to the combat-centric mission line. The final choice at the end is also pretty cool. Either Azrael breaks the sword and swears to destroy the Order of Saint Dumas, or attempts to kill Batman and take his place. It kind of puts you in a weird position, because we don't really know what Azrael would do. I always break the sword, assuming Lane will have regained a bit of control over his own mind over the brainwashing, and realise that attempting to kill Batman is a poor choice, but I'm honestly not sure. It's not as big of a choice as the choice presented in Shadow War, but it's a nice choice nonetheless, and that's always welcome. Overall, the gameplay for Heir To The Cowl is pretty good. That's about as far as I can go, it's alright. The combat sections are cool, but the added stipulation of not being hit is the only change here from any other combat section. And the detective gameplay at the end is, again, good. It's really, really okay. It doesn't try anything we hadn't done before, and doesn't introduce any new mechanics, and so for these reasons the gameplay gets a little bit of a disappointing 6 out of 10. It could have been something so much more, but alas. Let's see how hard this mission line is, but before we do, a lot of you guys aren't subscribed, so be sure to do that to not miss another video. Especially if you're a Batman fan, because I make Batman videos. Difficulty is hard to rate, so as per usual, we'll be doing a stand-in of someone who's played all the games on hard, and is good at them, and ranking the difficulty based on someone with that skill set. And so for the penultimate episode of this series, we're going to be using Marcus Phoenix, from hit third-person shooter franchise... Gears of War. Gears of War is one of my personal favourite franchises, and so Marcus will be our main man here, so let's go. The main part of this mission revolves around the combat section and their difficulty, which increases as the missions go on, beginning with a complete cakewalk and increasing in difficulty to you having to fight ninjas. And I hate ninjas. It works well and is quite hard if you're not on your A game. A stray punch or a random thrown object can bring Azrael's run to an end, and this can prove to be quite tricky, especially if you're already thrown off by dropping a combo or something else. The final segment with the ninjas is genuinely my worst nightmare. I've had sleepless nights over these guys. Their attack patterns are so different, and if you're used to the timings of usual thugs, these guys can be a complete spanner in the works. But Sergeant Phoenix has dealt with worse, and so doesn't fear ninjas or being hit by their swords. The detective part is really simple. You just scrub through Azrael's memories until you spot symbols from the Order's brainwashing. Scan them and then move on. It's pretty easy, even if you aren't really paying attention. They're on screen long enough to give you plenty of chance to see them, so there's no real difficulty here. That's it really. The choice at the end is simple. Either Azrael goes on his own mission of vengeance, or Azrael goes on his own mission to the GCPD lockup. That's it really, it just depends which ending you think's cooler. Overall, Marcus doesn't have an issue with this mission, maybe getting hit by a stray punch or a random environmental hazard, but nothing too crazy. And he gets through the detective part easily, there's no real challenge here at all. So difficulty wise, Heir To The Cowl gets a 6 out of 10. Overall, Heir to the Cowl gets a lukewarm, slightly disappointing 17 out of 30. A low score for what could have been a great mission. I like it personally and think it does a job. Not a great one, but it does a job for a character who definitely always deserves more screen time. But what about the side characters who didn't deserve a main video? Missions perhaps too short or just too devoid of content? Well, that's where Firefly, Man-Bat, Deacon Blackfire, Hush and the Line of Duty side objectives come into play. See, none of these had enough content or were long enough to warrant a main video, so were uploaded in the form of YouTube Shorts. I'm sure many of you haven't seen them, so here they are, as I like to call them, the Shorts. Reviewing Firefly's mission in Batman Arkham Knight in under a minute. The mission story-wise is pretty meh. Firefly has come back to Gotham to set firehouses on fire and generally wreak some havoc on Halloween after the firefighters of Firehouse 17 return to protect the city from the flames. Batman shows up and stops Lynn's completely wrecking 3 different fire stations, and commandeers his jetpack back to the GCPD, bringing his night to an end. The story gets a 3 out of 10. The gameplay, well, it's definitely there. You can use the power winch system to activate the sprinklers in the firehouses and scare Linz out of the stations, and then chase him down before jumping out of the Batmobile and punching him, before on the third go he stopped for good. It's boring, repetitive, and a damn sight worse than his Origins boss fight. 3 out of 10. Finally, difficulty. It's not hard at all. Even an actual fly could probably work their way around it. 2 out of 10. Overall, Gotham on Fire gets a disappointing 8 out of 30. Reviewing Deacon Blackfire's mission, Lamb to the Slaughter from Batman Arkham Knight in under a minute, out of 30, because it doesn't deserve a full video. The story begins when reoccurring reporter Jack Ryder was abducted by a religious cult ran by Deacon Blackfire, a D-tier Batman villain who didn't do himself any justice here. Batman shows up and saves Ryder by taking out Blackfire's cult in a large combat section, bringing Blackfire's night to an end as swiftly as it begun. The story gets a 2 out of 10. Gameplay's a giant combat section with minimal mix-up or changes. It's easy enough despite the large enemy count. That's it really, it gets a 4 out of 10 purely because combat in this game is fun. Finally, the difficulty. One large combat section and not much else gives this mission a low 3 out of 10. It's easy enough to get through since there's not much going on in terms of variety. Lamb to the Slaughter gets a 9 out of 30. Reviewing Hush's side mission in Batman Arkham Knight in under a minute. First, the story. After an interesting setup in Arkham City, Thomas Elliot returns looking exactly like Bruce Wayne and attempts to take all of Wayne Enterprises' funds, ruining Bruce Wayne's legacy. He attacks Lucius Fox to gain access to the computer in Bruce's office and begins the bank transfer. Batman shows up and the two talk backstory. Batman takes his mask off and reveals himself to be Bruce Wayne, and in a moment of fear from Elliot, Batman strikes and smashes Hush through the table with an assist from Lucius. Given what this could have been after his really good setup in Arkham City, it gets a 3 out of 10. It's sadly just a bit of a letdown. Onto the gameplay, you literally just counter Hush's attack. It's a 1 out of 10, a point per button press required to take him down. Finally, the difficulty. It's a 1 out of 10, a point per brain cell required to do this mission. Overall, Friend in Need gets a record low 5 out of 30. Reviewing Man-Bat's side mission in Batman Arkham Knight in under a minute. The mission begins when Batman and the player are jump scared out of their socks and Batman begins hunting down the new Bat on the block, and finds from a blood sample that he was once Dr. Kirk Langstrom. He heads to Langstrom's lab and finds his wife dead amidst the debris covering the lab. Batman does some detective work to find that Kirk was trying to splice bat and human DNA to cure deafness. He produces a clean DNA sample and finds Man-Bat twice more, injecting the DNA into him before injecting the rest of the cure into him and turning him back into Kirk Langstrom, thus taking him to the GCPD's containment cell. And on Halloween he can escape the cell and begin hunting again. This story is classic Man-Bat and gets a decent 6 out of 10. Gameplay's pretty simple. You find Man-Bat around each of the islands and inject him with the cure. The little minigame is fun to create the DNA. 4 out of 10. Finally, difficulty. It's a 4 out of 10 too, it's pretty easy. Overall, Creature of the Night gets 14 out of 30. Reviewing Line of Duty side mission in Batman Arkham Knight in under 90 seconds. The story begins when Aaron Cash tells Batman that firefighters from Station 17 have gone missing. Batman finds all of the fire crew have been kidnapped and taken across Gotham to be brutalised. Batman rescues the fire crew from different locations all across the city, and he finds out that Firefly made a deal with Chief Raymond Underhill to keep Station 17 operational, by setting fires to abandoned buildings and keeping them in a job. After Batman rescues the Chief confesses to his actions and lets Batman take him to maximum security at the GCPD building. showing Underhill's nobility despite the circumstances. The story here is pretty okay, and it ties into Firefly's involvement in the game, so it gets a 6 out of 10. The gameplay consists of saving the firefighters across the city, and these sections are pretty fun. The enemy variety is strong, and the final stealth section is huge and really fun. The gameplay gets a solid 7 out of 10. Finally, the difficulty. It's hard to locate the various firefighters if you don't know where they are, and the stealth and combat sections are decently solid, but nothing outrageous or new. So it gets a solid 5.5 out of 10, leaving Line of Duty with a respectable 18.5 out of 30. From the shortest missions in the game to definitely the longest mission in the game. Next up we have Riddler's Revenge, a favourite of mine as you rescue Catwoman from the Cyrus Pinckney orphanage. This mission to me is his best outing in the game, and as you're about to see over the next half an hour, I think he lives up to the title of best side mission in Batman Arkham Knight. Riddler always comes out with the biggest and most challenging of any side mission in the Arkham franchise. Whether it's his small but memorable collectathon on Arkham Island, his never-ending attempted Doctor destruction in the walled-off super prison of Arkham City, his extortionately complex citywide manhunt on Christmas Eve in Arkham Origins, or finally, his biggest plan yet, his magnum opus, his revenge. His plan to wear down Gotham's Dark Knight by sheer quantity while holding his lover hostage in Batman Arkham Knight. As far as the story goes, Riddler gets a good setup, which goes back as far as Riddler's rivalry with Batman itself. He's sick of being beaten, outsmarted, or unfairly cheated out of victory. His pain is constant and sharp, and he doesn't wish for a better world for anyone, least of all Gotham's Batman. He's been doxxed in the asylum, outsmarted in City, and even beaten by a younger, angrier Batman back on Christmas Eve, and tonight he's out for his ultimate revenge, once and for all. And what's the best way to get to the Bat? Well, you take the cat. Edward hired Catwoman to help him steal something from Wayne Enterprises to lure her into his trap, and be taken by his newest inventions, the first of their kind, the Riddler bots. After being brought into the fold of Scarecrow's plan to finally take Batman down and engulf Gotham in fear toxin, Riddler takes the Cyrus Pinckney orphanage on Miagani Island, and begins tricking it out with death traps, electric floors, robots, and of course, Catwoman. Not usually the one playing damsel in distress, tonight she might just have to wait for her Dark Knight in shining armour to save her, because Edward, being the gentleman he is, has strapped enough explosive to her neck to make sure none of her 9 lives are left. At least it's all packed in a stylish necklace. Batman can find out about this in one of 2 ways. The first being when Edward, never one to be outshone, broadcasts his plan across Gotham's billboards, telling the Dark Knight that he has Selina, and if he wants to make sure she doesn't lose her head, he must go to the orphanage, and upon arriving at said orphanage and freeing Selina from her restraints, Riddler throws some robots at us so he can use some classic Bat and Cat combo battering to dispatch of these things. The other way we can find Edward is right at the start of the night after taking Poison Ivy into the GCPD's custody. Aaron Cash tells us about a strange man skulking around the train yard. Here we can find Eddie's first trial. Either way, from here on, the story is simple to follow. Riddler has placed 10 jigsaw-like trials around Gotham, split between being placed around the city and in the orphanage. From races to gliding challenges, combat challenges, and challenges set specifically for a Bat and Cat team-up. And despite the fact superheroes don't do that kind of thing, the pair can work together to make sure Catwoman can keep her head going. Anyway, until the challenges and trials are done, the story is on hold, so let's look at what Eddie's got in store for us and we'll come back to the story later. Heading to the train yard for his first trial, we find a racetrack underground called Mental Blocked. And it's here Eddie outlines 10 rules for us to follow, none of which we'll be following because as he withholds codes needed to complete the course and control the obstacles we'll face, Batman decrypts the codes early and we begin the race, much to Riddler's dismay as he covers this clear mistake up as the night's first riddle. The challenge is as follows. Make it around the track 3 times using the codes we decrypted to control the various obstacles around the track, and complete it within the set time. It's a time trial with stakes. This is the first one of these we do, and it's pretty good. It's simple, fun, and something totally new. The added factor of being able to control the track to a certain level means we can really utilise the different obstacles, and with good timing, can really fly around this track using the Batmobile's now unlocked afterburner. After finishing the race and unblocking the mental block, Batman is shown a bunch of green lights in a specific order, with one red light. These lights represent the display of keys and display cases back at the orphanage, and the player now has to look at the display using Batman and pick the corresponding key as Catwoman. Failure to pick the right key results in Selina losing her head, and success sees the counter on her necklace go down by 1, and when all the trials are complete the collar can come off and the cat can go back on the prowl. After picking the right key and taking the counter down to 8 keys left, we can head over to the next trial in Chinatown. Balancing Act.
Well, Dark Knight, eager for more? It's humbling, isn't it?
Balancing Act is another Batmobile-based challenge, but this time it isn't a race, more a test of your precision driving the Batmobile. When visiting each trial, Riddler will proclaim his clear mental superiority over Batman, telling him how again, he's clearly the more mentally proficient of the two, despite the Dark Knight proving this to be wrong on numerous occasions. These little outbursts of mental-based rants are some of the funniest bits in the whole game. Riddler's voice actor, Wally Winger, who is one of the very few VAs to stay for all of the 4 mainline Arkham games, really captures the overblown ego and narcissistic tendencies of Edward Nygma. In my opinion, he is the Riddler. As good as different takes on him have been, Corey Michael Smith and Paul Dano come to mind as 2 of my favourites, but for me, Wally Winger surpasses them purely because, aside from capturing that completely unbearable essence, he makes the Riddler pathetically hilarious. Every line is delivered with such bravado and arrogance and overblown ego that you can't help but laugh at how genuinely sad Eddie comes across. He even looks like a bum. He stopped taking care of himself and dedicated his entire life to taking down Batman, and it still ends up not being enough, and it's kind of sad as it is pathetic, and makes this Riddler kind of likeable. Like, he's still the Riddler, so the urge to beat him to death with his own stick is still huge, but equally, he's kind of endearing, like, you kind of feel bad for him. Anyway, Balancing Act combines precise Batmobile driving, precise remote controlling, and a sprinkle of common sense, and this means that this challenge can be quite tricky for first-time players. It's a fun little challenge room because it combines so many different aspects of the game's movement, and after completing it we get another key, and Selina gets 1 step closer to freedom. Our next challenge room is actually in the orphanage, our first real Edward Nygma trap room for both of our characters to tackle. After heading to the orphanage, we find Selina relaxing under the pale light of the Riddler's intelligence, but before we can get to her, we need to solve a riddle which is all about differing perspectives. Obviously we do this and meet Selina, who seems really upset we didn't get to her sooner, because Eddie wouldn't open the next room until Batman arrived. When he finally does arrive, we enter the third challenge room, Numeracy 101.
I do hope you two are getting along, because you'll need to work together if you want to find the key hidden in here.
Numeracy 101 is the first room we go into, which takes the brains and brawn of the Bat and the Cat combined. The two stand on pressure pads and then have to tell each other the numbers which pop up on the board in front of them, which correspond to the other person's Riddler logo buttons, to which the correct code needs to be put in, and after both codes are put in correctly, Riddler's little helpers attack the pair, giving us some more tag team combat. And after the robots are defeated, Catwoman obviously gets her third key. This time there's no challenge to get the key because it's just in a display case, which can either be smashed in by Batman or carefully stolen by Catwoman. After leaving the room, Edward invites us to his next challenge, underneath the Elliott Memorial Hospital, and so that's our next stop. We get to Elliott Memorial and head down another one of the Riddler's comically long elevators before hitting the bottom, where we're faced with his next trial, the Crushinator.
I wanted you to know the full extent of my brilliance, you understand?
The Crushinator acts like the previous course. It's a racetrack. We can control using the codes Batman got earlier, meaning that, like Mental Blocked earlier on, we can kind of do this any which way we want, using well-timed object switches to complete the track and eventually get the key for Selina. This track is a little harder though due to its layout and tight corners, and most frustratingly, the blocks we can't control. There are certain sections where the blocks are remotely controlled and we can't do anything to them, so they end up acting like actual obstacles, which again, combined with this track's penchant for tight corners, makes this a genuinely tricky track to navigate if you're not on your A game. But thankfully, you're Batman and so you do make it through. And we make light work of this track and grab Selina's next key using the switchboard of lights. Next on our list of tests is a test of our gliding ability, as we take on Flight School.
Your feeble resistance makes a pleasant change from the instant capitulation of everyone else.
Flight School is underneath Gotham's casino, and it fills our need for speed, as we have to navigate a multi-stage gliding trial using the Batmobile's ejector seat to get enough air to gradually unlock the track around. Dodging the water beneath us, the hallway of saw blades and crushers, and finally, most dangerously, Riddler's razor-sharp comments, like this one where he actually kind of makes a good point.
The only mammal capable of flight, since all you do is glide, is actually a variety of storms.
This is actually one of my favourite of the trials in the game because it makes use of the gliding and really puts you to the test while using it. It's genuinely fun to glide in this game and has some of the best and most satisfying gliding in the franchise, so to use it here and have it integrated into the game in a way which isn't just an AR challenge is really cool. But after completing the course and finding the right box for Catwoman's next key, we find out that our next trial is back at the orphanage, so it's time to head back to Selina and see what we can do about getting that necklace off. Upon arriving back at the orphanage and heading into the next room, our next trial lies in front of us. Intro to Physics.
Your next challenge is simple. Guide an electric charge to its destination.
Intro to Physics is actually one of the more smartly put together challenges Eddie has done for us, because for once it doesn't involve someone being killed should they fail, and it actually involves a little bit of intelligence, something that not a lot of these rooms or racetracks do. I mean, why would Riddler want to kill Batman because he can't drive well? It baffles the mind. But anyway, you need to make a path for an electrical current using pipes which move when corresponding pads are stood on, and each moving pipe moves higher depending on how much weight is on it. Batman weighs the most, so he moves the pipes up a fair bit, but if you need to move the current pipe right to the top, Catwoman will need to share the pad with Batman, combining the two's collective weight since Catwoman weighs about half as much as Batman. So if you need a pipe moving a little bit, stand on it with just Selina, and move Batman over to the next pipe to keep the circuit flowing. It's really cool actually, and a good way to use the otherwise pretty boring Riddler pressure pads. After the current has reached its destination, the key appears, but of course it's on an electrified floor. Either of the characters can stand on a pad which powers the floor down, but Riddler introduces his second generation of android allies. These new Riddlerbot variants are coloured red and blue, and these colours correspond to who can deal damage to them. Batman can hit the blue ones, Catwoman can hit the red ones, and if either character hits the other person's bot, they get shocked and a broken combo. So to get the key you have to fight these bots, switching between the pair on the fly to take them down, before finally grabbing the 6th key and finding out the next challenge is in Otisburg. We head to Otisburg in the Batmobile and head down yet another really long elevator shaft, listening to the sweet sound of the Riddler's mental demise as we head to our next challenge, Drain Pain.
World's greatest detective, ha! And everyone from Gotham to Star City believes it.
Drain Pain is a weird challenge, but it's quite fun. You have to use the Bat-Tank's winch to lower yourself down to different levels of the course and spin the different sections around to unlock a room. After getting into the room and standing on the pressure pad within, you can then move on to the next one, slowly draining the water out of the hole until a final pad is revealed at the bottom, which needs to be stood on so you can unlock the board of lights for you to guide Selina to her next key. Along the way down, the different rooms have two different small challenges. Either a group of Riddlerbots ambush you, or a pair of turrets need to be taken down with the Batmobile. Either way, this room is one of the harder ones. Here's a time-lapse of me trying to complete it for this video. Keep in mind, I've 240%ed this game 3 times. Which, if my maths is correct, which it usually isn't, means I've done this room at least 6 times. At least, bare minimum, 6 times. And this is the time-lapse, it's genuinely awful.
Take me on home to the asylum. Never alone in the asylum. Anarchy ruled, it was wild, but through it all you never smiled. Joke's on you, I'm in your head, so look who's laughing now. Remember in Arkham City, I killed your girl, so pretty. That was the night you let me die. But when I looked you in the eye, that's when I knew we'd be be together. Look who's laughing now.
Anyway, enough of that. We get the key and head back to the orphanage for our 8th trial. We get back to Selina, who begins having doubts she'll ever get out of here, but Batman reassures her she'll be fine, and the two head into the next riddle room, Advanced Death Traps.
I'd just like to say what a novelty it's been constructing riddle chambers for 2 half-wits instead of 1.
This room again requires both the bat and the cat to work in tandem with each other and give each other the correct information to survive. This time it means telling each other the right route to walk on an electrified floor. This isn't too hard until Riddler, being the swell guy he is, begins spinning the 2 boards that the information of the right route is on around. Meaning, unless you're actually intelligent, this becomes a lot harder, despite the fact that about halfway across you can just tank the damage and walk onto the pressure pad without the route, but that's cheating and we don't do that. After helping each other across the floor, Riddler sends more of his coloured coordinated killers and we have to fight them off, making sure to use the different characters for the correct bots, and making plenty of use of our dual team takedown, which makes whatever unlucky robot is selected for that move neutral, meaning both characters can get a bit of damage in. We get the key and nearly have 1 paw in the safe zone before Riddler tells us our penultimate riddle room is nigh, and we need to head to Rowley. We need to head to the Rowley Jefferson Ferry Terminal and go and do it. We head to the terminal and find yet another giant elevator shaft, which we can take down to the bottom and find our final racetrack, Condemned.
This is it, Dark Knight. We're done. Well, you're done for, at least.
Condemned seems to have caused a lot of uproar in the community for actually being fairly difficult. It's a racetrack, which doesn't sound too bad, but the sheer quantity of obstacles here makes this the hardest in the game. Each time you go around it, it also changes, whether that be obstacles being different parts of it being controllable by your codes, or even just the course springing new routes onto you. This is the Riddler's hardest challenge yet. A part of it requires you to go vertical on the wall as you have to dodge different crushers. This part is a stumbling block of all stumbling blocks, and the added time limit doesn't help at all. On the flip side though, this course is really fun. It's quite long, maybe a minute per lap if you're decent, and has so many different little tricks and turns that it really is a great final track for you to have to complete. What I love most about it, and basically all of Riddler's different sections, are the designs. Each room and underground section has such a great atmosphere, and even with Riddler's flashy neon lights, the rooms really feel like such a great part of this game, which sticks to the game's overall theme of having great interiors. The orphanage especially is great with it, having a mixture of creepy imagery and remnants of a bygone use of the building, and new additions put in by Riddler. Each part of these mission lines are great, and something I really appreciate about this mission in general. We finish the racetrack and get Catwoman's penultimate key, where we find out that the final riddle room to free Catwoman is back in the orphanage, so that's where we go. Upon arriving back at the orphanage, we find the final exam.
Perfect. Eddie hasn't said a word since you left that last course. Do you ever rub people the right way?
This room requires Batman to use my beloved Ret Gun to move different Riddler pads around the room so the lasers hanging from the ceiling can hit the floor, using Catwoman as a way to stop the different pads moving when you don't want them to. You do this a few times and eventually the number of lasers multiplies, and after each go the giant blades in the room go after Catwoman, but these can be avoided outright by simply hanging from the ceiling. This room is more of a test of patience, and honestly, for a final exam, really isn't that hard. I mean, the final racetrack was more difficult, I think. I mean, it's decently difficult, but the final racetrack, again, it was probably much worse than this for most players. After completing the room and letting all of the lasers hit the floor, we get Selina's final key, setting her free. But not before, when Catwoman and Batman try to leave, Riddler bursts through the door in a giant mechanical suit and the pair have to fight off more Riddler bots, as Eddie proclaims his premature victory over the duo. But after all of the bots are taken care of, he tells Batman words that would haunt the fanbase for years to come.
You want to finish this, detective? Then you must earn the privilege.
Solve every last riddle in this city and I'll fight you, Batman, but not a moment before.
Yes, that's right, you can't fight Eddie and bring this ordeal to an end unless you find every single one of his trophies, secrets, and Easter eggs. All 243 of them. Yep, all of them. Batman and Catwoman part ways, and so our odyssey begins to complete the Riddler trophies. Riddler was slacking this time around, placing just over 200 less than he did back in Arkham City, but alas, these challenges are more challenging? There are so many different types of Riddler challenges spread throughout the city, and its various interiors, including Simon Stagg's airships, the movie studios, the clock tower, and the GCPD, along with a few more interiors which I'm sure I'm forgetting, because these things are everywhere. There's your standard riddles, usually pertaining to some sort of in-universe Easter egg, your standard trophies that'll just be lying around, trophies locked behind time trials across the city, trophies locked behind challenges themed around the Riddler bots, trophies locked behind Batmobile detective sections akin to the tracking sections of the main story, destructible objects both in the Batmobile and on foot, and even some locked in smaller, less complex riddle rooms, which are always fun, and of course, to find these naturally, it's best to go after any green glowing thug, militia soldier, or even GCPD cop. These can be found around the city, and depending on their level of anti-bat training, they might even resist the initial interrogation, a new way of mixing up the system built in Arkham City. These informants can even be found in cars, making for some really cool moments. Ripping an informant from the car they're in and getting whatever information they know is so cinematic, and it's really fun. The Riddler trophies, riddles, and challenges are also a fun way of expanding the lore of the universe, and can unlock things like concept art, character trophies, and of course, your pride. Finding all of these trophies and challenges and clearing the city of Riddler's influence, and eventually heading back to the orphanage, means we can finally get our hands on the Riddler. He comes up in his giant suit and the fight plays out as it did before, with him sending different coloured robots after us, and we fight them off until, well, we can't anymore. Until Catwoman swoops in and makes the save. We fight the robots and eventually can do dual team moves on Riddler, punching him in the face like we've all wanted to do since about 2009. We do this a few times and finally, after a night of unrelenting annoyance, take Edward Nygma down once and for all. When we leave the orphanage and put Riddler in the Batmobile to be taken to GCPD, we get a conversation between Catwoman and Batman, which initially begins with Catwoman telling Batman he should be thankful for help. But then Batman tells her that he won't be around after tonight, and this is the last time they meet. And despite Selina's best attempt, Bruce stays stoic and the two share a kiss before he leaves with Riddler, leaving Selina behind before the Nightfall Protocol. We then take Riddler to the GCPD lockup, who proudly tells Aaron Cash that he'll be representing himself before being left behind bars, bringing the Riddler's Revenge to an end. Before we get to the rankings and the final standings of each mission, I want to talk about the characters in this mission, because there isn't a bad outing here, and a surprise outing which adds so much humour and depth to this mission line. I touched on how great Riddler's performance is earlier, but Catwoman's also pretty good here. She really feels like Catwoman, if that makes sense. She's got this kind of attitude towards the whole situation that she doesn't care, but in brief moments she's clearly scared she might not make it out, and it's a great way of deepening her character beyond a sassy damsel in distress for Batman to rescue. She also gets a nice ending with Batman, where she kind of comes to terms with the fact tonight really is the end of their relationship, and Batman as she knows him, and it's quite a bittersweet ending. Knowing they'll both be alright, but also knowing they won't be together, is quite an emotional way to say goodbye to a character in this series. The other character who gets a great outing here is, of all people, the Joker. Yes, the Joker. Mr. J is so funny in this mission line, and since he's kind of a manifestation of Batman's thoughts, it brings a whole new meaning and dimension to the stuff he says. Like, some of his commentary on the situation is so funny, and his little monologue about meeting Talia al Ghul in hell and quote-unquote comforting her is so funny. Like, Batman's losing his mind, and somewhere in that mental chaos, he's thought that Joker and Talia are in hell with each other. Even if it is the Joker and his mind roaming about and taking over his thoughts, it's so funny, and I think he gets his funniest comments here by far. Riddler also gets some moments to build on his character, one in particular that's been talked about to death in the final boss fight, where he mistakenly calls Batman father, alluding to his childhood trauma that we learned about back in the asylum. It's a throwaway line, but one which I think adds a new level of depth to this character in this universe. But alas, here we are. What does Riddler's Revenge score? Well, for the story, I was pretty mixed. I like it, and it's a simple story, but the characters really carry it and its charm. Every character, even an otherwise pretty stoic Batman, gets some funny lines here, some good dialogue and great character moments. Finally locking Riddler up is a great ending, and that final meeting between Batman and Catwoman is so emotional and a great way to end their story. But it doesn't push the boat out, it also doesn't do anything wrong. All of the characters are great, it's a simple story to follow, but my big gripe, and the reason it can't get any higher than what it's going to get, is that the real ending of this story is locked behind all of the Riddler challenges and trophies in the city. Personally, I don't mind collecting the Riddler trophies and solving the riddles, I think it's really fun, but I know that's a big gripe for some people, and it'll be a big reason a lot of people don't ever complete this game. Combined with it not doing anything outwardly amazing story-wise, and it's the characters involved and how they're handled that get it the large majority of its points, as it earns a respectable 7 out of 10. Gameplay is this side mission's strong point, and through sheer brute force and quantity of content, it has everything. If we look at the riddle rooms, the content under the city, and the Riddler trophies, riddles, and other open world content, you do everything this game has to offer. There literally isn't something you don't end up doing in pursuit of finally taking down the Riddler, and the best part is that it's all pretty fun. There's only a handful of challenges that I remember being annoying enough to pull up a guide, but apart from that, this mission line thrives on the gameplay, and I personally think in terms of both consistent quality and decent quantity of challenges, this is Riddler's peak. The actual in-mission rooms are great, and above all else pretty fun to complete, whether it's solo or with Catwoman, and the racetracks are some of the most fun Batmobile sections in the game, which feel really good to play and don't feel overly used given that there aren't too many time trials. This mission also has plenty of the great dual team combat Arkham Knight does so well, and having Batman and Catwoman fight alongside each other is so cool to see and really gives off some serious comic book vibes. Fighting Riddler alongside Catwoman, I don't know, it just feels right. And finally, the cherry on top, the rewards are great. Well, that is if you're into the lore of the Arkhamverse, and the Gotham City stories are some of the most interesting glimpses of other facets of this universe we get, and the best ones are unlocked through these challenges, and for all of those reasons, I'd be hard-pressed to give Riddlers Revenge's gameplay anything but a 10 out of 10. So, for the final rating of this series, how difficult is Riddler's Revenge? Well, I'll keep this short and sweet because I think there's one simple question which can pretty accurately determine how hard this mission is. How many of you watching have bothered, even after all these years, to get all of the Riddler trophies and fight the Riddler? The actual missions aren't overly hard, although I have heard a lot of complaints about the final racetrack, but aside from that, they're all pretty simple. But what gives this mission a massive push in terms of difficulty is the open world content, and doing it without a guide, fully legit, well, I'm going to get on my high horse a bit and say that the first time I played this game, or went for the 240%, I actually did do it legit. I mean, the other 2 times I did use a guide, I'm not going to shy away from that, alright? I'm a man of principle and honesty, and yeah, I used a guide the other 2 times, but the first time, I did do it without a guide, and it took years off my life, and I can't imagine that your casual Arkham fan is going to want to do this. There's such a huge amount of trophies, riddles and challenges to collect, but some of them are pretty hard if you aren't armed with the Batman knowledge of a lifelong fan, or the patience of a saint. And so for that reason, Riddler's Revenge gets a difficulty rating of 10 out of 10. A nearly perfect 27 out of 30 for Mr. Nashton's final outing pre-Nightfall. So, with Riddler out the way, that leaves us with only one last piece of side mission content to go over. The final rankings. Ranking each and every single side mission in Batman Arkham Knight, from worst to the very best. And I'm sure if you have got a good memory, you can remember the worst, and you certainly already know the best. But what's interesting is what lies in between the worst and the best. The middle ground, the top 3, the top 4, and hell, the bottom 4. So join me as we celebrate Batman Arkham Knight's slightly lackluster side missions with the final ranking. So here we are, the final ratings. 5 months of work and we've reached the end. Which side mission is Arkham Knight best? Well, let's start from the bottom. Starting us off as the worst side mission in Arkham Knight, Friend in Need, Hush's lackluster outing, which got a 5 out of 30. Next up, earning a whole 3 points more than Hush, is Firefly, whose Gotham on Fire side mission earned him 8 out of 30 points. Not much better, but a step up from pressing a grand total of 5 buttons. Coming in with 1 more point than that is Deacon Blackfire, the mad preacher whose Lamb to the Slaughter side mission earned him 9 out of 30, mostly for the combat section and the fun gameplay of this game. Taking a huge 5-point leap to our next mission is Creature of the Night. Man-Bat's first and only appearance in the Arkham franchise sees Dr. Langstrom get a decent one-and-done outing, with an overall score of 14 out of 30. Going right back to where it all began, Faced Bandit snuck in just ahead of Man-Bat with a sneaky 14.5. A decent score for everyone's favourite DA and his stealth-based bank heist missions. Next up is a not-so-perfect crime, as Professor Pig's Perfect Crime side mission comes in with 17 out of 30 points, although I don't think this rating system does this mission justice at all. Next up, the process of picking Gotham's next saviour, Heir to the Cowl, got a respectable 18 out of 30. But firing itself ahead of Azrael by a whole 0.5 points is Line of Duty, and Captain Underhill sneaks in with 18.5 out of 30, with its fun gameplay and decent story just about getting it a top spot. Again, by another 0.5 points, the Arkham Knight's Militia occupation missions get themselves a good 19 out of 30, showing that maybe a good boss fight can make or break a side mission. But now, we're into the top 5. Our first 2 missions to be tied goes to the first 2 missions of the Season of Infamy DLC to appear on our list, with Wonderland and Beneath the Surface getting 20 out of 30 apiece, with Croc and Hatter sharing 5th place. Coming in at 4th, getting itself a Champions League spot, is Shadow War, one of only 2 missions which ends with the player making a choice which can impact Gotham in the long term. A good side mission for a beloved group of characters, and one which divides opinion to this day, with it getting a very respectable 24 out of 30. In 3rd place, a strong contender for the best side mission, but falling short on its difficulty, is Gunrunner, giving Penguin's gun smuggling operation a top 3 place, but much like Oswald, it fails to get any higher and gets a 25 out of 30. Coming in at 2nd place, an emotional farewell for a beloved character who thrived on memorable moments in 3 out of 4 mainline Arkham games. With his classic introduction in Arkham City, his New Year's Eve crash out in Arkham Origins, and then the mission which got him the 2nd place here, Mr. Freeze and In From the Cold getting nearly perfect 26 out of 30. And coming in at number 1, a man who needs no introduction but is currently sat on top of a 29-minute introduction, some people's least favourite mission in every game he's in, some people's favourite, a mission which divides opinion as much as the central character of it. The best side mission in Batman Arkham Knight, following the old phrase of saving the best until last, is the Riddler's Revenge. Edward Nygma gets himself top spot and is crowned the best side mission in Batman Arkham Knight, with a nearly perfect 27 out of 30, just beating out Freeze and Penguin to claim the award, which will stroke his ego more than beating Batman. So I guess we all have to begrudgingly congratulate Edward Nygma for this accomplishment. Congratulations, Eddie, you finally won something. So, with the side missions ranked and Edward Nygma sadly coming out on top, fueling that all-important ego of his, we come to the DLC. Batman Arkham Knight's DLC is nothing short of disappointing. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's really not good. It has one shining beacon of hope, and the rest really just needed more time. And that's basically the gist of Arkham Knight's DLC content. Great execution in certain aspects, awful execution in most aspects. Batman Arkham Knight's DLC, all of it, just needed more time. A flip of a coin clocks in at a massive 15-minute runtime, rendering it hard to review in depth, but there are some really cool gameplay, story and narrative beats here, which could be really interesting to build upon if given more time in future games, especially a full-fledged sequel to Night which doesn't involve the Suicide Squad. The story begins in Hell's Gate Disposal Service, with now wife of Tim Drake, Oracle, or Barbara Gordon, telling her husband that Two-Face has escaped custody following his bank robbing spree on the night of Halloween. We find out that the newlyweds have also cut their honeymoon short to come back to Gotham and stop Harvey again. We find out Dent is processing money from banks in Bloodhaven which robbed following Nightwing's absence while taking down the Penguin with Batman. We got our first glimpse at Robin's main dilemma beside Dent in this story, the internal and external struggle with dealing with the fact that he isn't Batman, something the Thugs, Two-Face and even Oracle point out multiple times, both for different reasons, but the point stands. Tim has to deal with the fact that he has to step into Batman's size 12s and don the metaphorical cowl as Gotham's new main vigilante. It's an interesting point to bring up in this story because it's a point that really is the main issue of the story, and this ties into one of the main issues with this DLC, and that's its undercooking of this great dilemma. The story comes in on average of about 15 minutes from start to finish, and obviously a lot of that, thankfully considering this is a video game, is gameplay. But it would have been nice to bring this point up in a longer story, giving it time to fester and become more prominent before Tim realises he isn't Batman. And more importantly, isn't Bruce. After taking down all of the thugs in the disposal plant, Tim has to interrogate the foreman to find Harvey, and we see Tim's first real shortcoming. And that's the fact that the thugs don't find him nearly as intimidating or mythical as Batman. The foreman actually kind of scoffs at the idea of being interrogated by Robin, thinking he won't be as mean or as ruthless as Batman. A thought he quickly comes to regret speaking out as he's hung out of a window above a disposal furnace. Tim is told Harvey's in the main office, and the next time we take control of Tim, we're in the mansion where the office is located. The whole opening section of this game is the first of just 2 sections, highlighting again the issue here. It's a great concept with so much potential. A slow burn story as Tim realises he isn't Batman and needs to find his own way to become Gotham's protector, rather than trying to replicate his mentor, would have served this story so well. But the story just isn't long enough. Oracle says she hopes Tim doesn't become Bruce, because Bruce is gone and his mission and memory need to be a driving force to be better, and not a goal to attain, because that was his way of doing things, and it led to him losing everything before he died. Although, for all of Oracle's support, she does not take her husband seriously as a crime fighter. She makes multiple clearly sarcastic comments at his lack of fear factor, and even in stealth and combat cheers him on, less like a supportive wife and partner, but more like in a way you clap someone after messing up in a sports game. She comes across much like Two-Face, well, two-faced, and it's a really weird stance for her to take. I mean, even in this game, we see the two take down Joker and Harley Quinn together, and although Joker escapes, it shows that she does know how good he is, and so coming across like a sympathetic supporter is really weird, but anyway. Tim heads deeper into the mansion and takes down some thugs guarding the door, who are also talking about how the job's too big for him, and he won't be able to do what Batman did for all those years. Again though, they'd come to regret this line of thought as he would take them down and head closer to Dent's office. Taking down some more thugs, but comes to a locked door, which needs to be hacked. After taking down some more of Dent's men in a combat encounter, Oracle challenges Tim to a race to hack the door, which Tim wins. Obviously, it's not that hard. And again, this shows even Tim's in-universe mental skill is really, really strong, as it should be. He's not a pushover. After getting through the door, Tim is held back by a sniper, but pushes forward using his bullet shield and knocks him into Dent's path. Robin is ambushed by multiple of Dent's men and takes them down with relative ease, before Harvey shoots Robin in the leg, bypassing his bullet shield and begins taunting him about how, again, he will never be Batman, he just isn't good enough. But as Dent flips the coin to decide his fate, Tim takes him down in one fell swoop and catches the coin out of the sky on the burnt side, ending Dent's scheme again in the flip of a coin. Oracle and Tim decide to push their honeymoon to the side and continue their crime-fighting adventures indefinitely. So that's the story of a flip of a coin, but that's not the whole story. Because beneath Two-Face's money laundering and the crime lord's return lies a lot of missed potential. Throughout the Arkham series, Robin constantly proves he's more than capable of standing alone and working in a team. He breaks in and out of Arkham City to deliver Batman the Line Launcher, takes down Joker and Harley with the help of Barbara, actually saves Batman's life in Arkham City after the Joker's death, works on the cure to the Joker's infection in Night, and so many more examples like this where he's clearly very, very competent and definitely at Batman's level, if not slightly below, because obviously Batman's got that aura around him, I suppose. But he just seems to be crapped on the whole time, and it affects him as a character. Throughout the story, he sounds very sort of dulled, and compared to his other appearances, he's not as happy and sort of jokey as you'd expect a Robin to be, and I can fully understand why. Until Batman died, it seemed like fighting crime was fun for him, or at least a bit enjoyable. But in this story, he sounds like he'd rather be anywhere but here taking down Dent. Obviously that might be down to his honeymoon with Barbara being cut short, but it's really noticeable they made Robin sound like Batman. And although I think this was an intentional choice to show how losing Bruce and trying to exist now he's out of the shadow of the Bat has affected him, it wasn't given long enough to marinate and come across like a real idea. Matter of Family is this game's big DLC pack. It has its own map, own fully fledged story, its own collectibles, and gives its ideas time to linger and develop as the story goes on. But here, nothing is given time to exist and let the player really get lost in this world and this portion of the Arkham timeline. If given more time, this story could have been so great. Showing Tim genuinely struggle with his new role as the pseudo second in command of the Bat family could have made for some really emotional moments. Seeing this beloved character, and a character we're used to seeing thrive and enjoy his job, now be beaten down emotionally by everyone and everything around him, could have been really good and a great way to expand the ongoing story of this universe. But sadly this wasn't the case, and the whole story pack feels a bit half-baked. We get a lot of really cool ideas here too, it's not like this pack has nothing in it. Two-Face being the main villain is a great choice, Robin's internal struggle with his new role is a great idea, and the whole idea of the pack itself is really cool. But Robin's arc in the story of the doubtful hero trying his best, it's just never completed. Everyone talks down and looks down on Robin. Thugs laugh at the idea of being taken down by Robin. Barbara, maybe unintentionally, puts him down. Two-Face himself tells him that he's not good enough. But Robin never goes through the arc of self-doubt. He always just seems a bit annoyed no one takes him seriously. He never gets time to go through this arc though. He sounds all off and depressed, but he never actually goes through that defining arc that the rest of the game shows so well with Batman. In Arkham Asylum, Batman's riddled with self-doubt, outright telling Gordon he doesn't think he can stop Joker, making the Big Bang ending so memorable. In City, you watch his Protocol 10 happen before stopping it, leaving Talia behind in the Joker's grasp, failing his plan of finding out what Protocol 10 is and stopping it before it starts. In Night, the whole game is literally Batman sitting there and saying, look, I might be done here, like, this might be the one that kills me, and it does. And in Origins, it's the confrontation with Alfred leading into the aftermath of the attack on the Batcave by Bane, which shows Batman at a huge low point, probably the lowest we see him in the franchise. He's beaten and has to pick himself back up to overcome the odds. But Robin never gets that. He gets so many opportunities throughout the Arkham franchise, and this could have been a great ending to Robin's story as we know him. But it just never quite gets there. Everyone doubts Robin, and he still doesn't get beaten. He gets shot by Harvey and then takes him down like 3 seconds later. But there's never a moment in Robin's story in the Arkhamverse of serious doubt. Everything just seems to be this like happy-go-lucky, yay, I'm Robin and I never go through anything. And then when he finally does go through something, it's nothing. He's just annoyed that the world doesn't see him as Batman. He's not actually having that moment of, okay, I might not actually be able to do this, like, they might be right, I might be a kid playing dress-up. He never goes through that, and Tim just seems to be annoyed at everyone for doubting him, because although he knows he's as good as Batman, he's not Batman, and thus no one will treat him with the same respect or fearful caution that he deserves. They really did waste Robin here, and the whole story landed on the scarred side of the coin, rendering Robin a sidekick without the kick, and a bird without his wings. A flip of the coin could have been great if given time. Time it just wasn't afforded, and sadly time that I don't think we're ever going to get back with this character after Suicide Squad killed the Justice League. I think Batman Arkham Knight did great in certain aspects with its DLC content. Giving each of these characters their own story was a great idea, but as we'll come to find out as we go through the rest of these stories, a lot of them's main issue is the time. They don't give their characters enough time to breathe and grow. And I'm not saying I wanted every story campaign to be the size of A Matter of Family, or every story campaign to be the same length as the main story, because obviously that's not feasible. But just a little bit more, just to show that, hey, these characters do go through the same doubts as Batman, even if it was just Robin, because Robin deserves it. He's been in so many really memorable moments, and moments in the franchise where you go, wow, this guy's really good, because he needs to be good. He's Batman's sidekick. He has to be good. And like he says in the main game, Batman trained him. He's good at his job. And I just wish there was that moment of Robin realising, or doubting himself and thinking, wow, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. Maybe they're right, and maybe Batman was bailing me out. Batman was saving me. Batman was why I was good. And now he's gone. I'm not. I used Batman as a crutch. But then realising that at the end of the day, Batman's gone now, and whatever Batman did, he can't do anymore. It's Robin's time to shine. Batman is gone. Robin needs to be the new symbol of hope within Gotham. And it would have been really nice to see this through this DLC story, because it's a great setup. And like I said, I think using Two-Face as a main villain is really good, because Two-Face is a feasible villain for Robin to take down. He is a threat, but he's not like a Joker level threat. But even then, Tim is clearly shown to be good. He takes down Joker and Harley with Barbara, and although that wasn't with Barbara, he still does it. It's still on the resume, it's still on the stats. Tim does end up taking down Joker and Harley Quinn, even though Joker does escape, but the point still stands. The point is, Tim was wasted and Robin was wasted in this franchise, and I really hope we get to see more of him in future installments, because he deserves it. I don't think he was given a great run out in the Arkham franchise, and a flip of the coin just kind of brings that to light more than anything else. He could have been great if he was given time. Time that, like I said, I don't think we're going to get back with this character, which is a real shame. But what about the other Arkham episodes? Well, there's not much to say on them, because they're all pretty bad. And again, spoiler alert, they're bad. They really do not do much. They give us a new playable character, which is always interesting, and yeah, in a way they do flesh out the Arkhamverse, but in the grand scheme of things, they don't really do anything that well. They flesh out interesting characters to a certain degree, but in terms of bringing new ideas to these characters, it's few and far between. There's very few good character moments here, and the good character moments there are usually by characters who aren't even on screen. But enough yapping, let's give them a chance, and start off with Nightwing. Beginning with GCPD Lockdown, a story which is as long as it is interesting. Following the events of Arkham Knight, Nightwing has to stop Penguin from breaking out of the GCPD and foil his plan and take down his men. Basically, it begins with Nightwing in the Bloodhaven docks, where, after taking down some of Penguin's goons, he questions one who tells him their plan to bust out Cobblepot from the GCPD. So Nightwing heads to the GCPD, takes his men down, and thwarts Cobblepot's plan to escape.
Sort of.
What this story lacks in gameplay, though, it makes up for in character. Nightwing's man in the chair here is Lucius Fox, who we find out is now the CEO of Wayne Enterprises following Bruce Wayne's death in Wayne Manor, and in his words, throws parties that are
off the chain, I believe they say.
Playing as Nightwing is fun. He has some really slick and fun animations during combat, and although I don't think he's quite as good as he is in Arkham City, it's nice to play as another character nonetheless. We get 3 combat sections, one of which taking place in Penguin's Bloodhaven dock hideout, the second being on top of the GCPD, and the third being very reminiscent of a combat section in the main campaign outside the GCPD's main elevator, where Lucius can control various environmental takedown opportunities to be set up by Nightwing, the same way Oracle helps Batman during the assault on the GCPD by the Arkham Knight's forces in the main campaign. We also get a huge Predator section where Nightwing has to rewire various junction boxes around the inside of the building, which has a good variety of enemies, as does every part of this story to be fair. We get ninjas, shields, brutes, knives, guns. It's a really varied group of missions enemy-wise, but mostly it thrives on the character moments. Nightwing gets some really funny lines here, and we get to see him be the senior member of the Bat family in the wake of Batman's demise, which is cool. The running theme with these packs is that they are great for expanding the world of Gotham after Batman's death, but in terms of real story and building on the ideas, they're pretty light. And this issue expands over onto our next case study, Red Hood's Story Pack. Red Hood's Story Pack also takes place after the events of the main game, with Jason Todd now operating under his Red Hood alias as he tracks down Black Mask with the intent of taking down the crime boss once and for all. It follows Jason post Arkham Knight, and it's honestly kind of disappointing. It consists of 2 combat sections and a stealth section in the middle, and I'm not even going to try and stick up for this. It kind of sucks. Again, great idea, poor execution. Red Hood is fun to play as though. He has guns, so you can literally just gun people down, which is both absolutely hilarious and fun, which makes King Todd really fun to play as. It's great, and the pack does introduce new enemy types, the bulletproof enemies, which are a nice mix-up. But in terms of story here, there isn't much. Red Hood wants to kill Black Mask, he finds Black Mask, kills him, delivers a one-liner, story's over. Really, there isn't much to go at here, but it does expand the overall lore of the Arkham universe, which is nice, but aside from that, it's a bit meh. The final fight against Black Mask and his men is okay. It's a combat section with Black Mask, who's actually slightly more strong than the henchmen, a lesson they probably learned from having Two-Face in the story just to be the same strength as the normal henchman, which is a nice change, and Black Mask does this shooty attack that you have to dodge. It's pretty cool, but I really can't drag this out anymore. I give up. It's mid as hell. Moving on. Next up on the chopping block, the Harley Quinn Story Pack. This is the only pack beside A Matter of Family which takes place prior to the Nightfall Protocol and thus the main game. It follows Harley Quinn as she invades Bloodhaven Police Department to rescue Poison Ivy, so she can help Scarecrow's hostile takeover of Gotham and killing of Batman. This pack is probably the most intriguing, purely because Harley is quite different from Jason and Dick, in that she's absolutely different to play as in basically every way. I feel like this whole video has been really negative, but I'm sorry, Harley sucks to play as in stealth. In combat she's quite fun, in fairness, but in stealth, it really annoys me because it's not stealth. I get her thing's supposed to be loud and chaotic, but at that point just throw a combat section in there. No one wants to do stealth as a character who doesn't do stealth. Anyway, what I do like about this pack is the fact we actually leave Gotham, which is quite fun. Albeit it's in a singular building, but it's fun to leave Gotham for once and see the differences between the GCPD and the BPD. But on the flip side, there's the boss fight against Nightwing. So you know how pretty notoriously in the Arkham series, Harley cannot hit Batman unless he's previously incapacitated? Well, in this pack, she single-handedly solos Nightwing. Yeah, Batman's second in command. She completely beats his ass. An interesting decision on the half of the developers to bury one of their central heroes to make the villain look good in a standalone story pack, and it's not a decision I quite understand. But it's interesting. One little thing I do appreciate about this pack, though, is that while playing as Harley and entering her crazy vision, we can actually hear Harleen speak to Harley, which is quite disturbing, but a fun little addition that shows the mental decline of the previously respected psychiatrist. It's sad, really, hearing Harleen beg for help inside Harley Quinn's head, but nonetheless, it's a fun Easter egg which can be passively discovered. I do respect this pack somewhat for trying something new, kind of. Harley's stealth might genuinely make me feel sick, but it just isn't stealth. But at least it's something different, and the fact there's a boss fight is something, I guess. Red Hood had one too, but I think the idea of fighting a member of the Bat family is fun. But that's about it. The stealth gameplay improvements, or I say improvements, added features, are a bit weird. You can use these plants to take down the different officers around the station, which is quite fun. It kind of has this very, very loose tag team element between Harley and Poison Ivy, which is quite cool. But that's about it, so let's just get on to the next one. Catwoman's Revenge is probably the most memorable out of the 4 packs we've spoken about, for one reason: the ending fight. I genuinely cannot fathom how anyone decided this was a good idea for a fight, with a character whose moveset solely revolves around the fact she's flamboyant and a bit all over the place with her moves, dragging enemies left and right and taking her time with them during ground takedowns. I hate this, it sucks. It's also one of very few times, and I'm talking you can count the amount of times this has happened on video in one hand, that Batman Arkham videos had a combo broken. And if that doesn't speak to this fight's stupid difficulty, then I don't know what does. It's a sick joke. But apart from that, this isn't an awful pack. It takes a lot of Catwoman tropes from Arkham City, with the 3 keycard pickpocketing, hanging from the ceilings, etc, etc, but it really isn't that bad. Catwoman's a fun character to play as, and her stealth doesn't make me want to bathe in acid, so it gets points for that. Story-wise, it sees Selina break into Riddler's weird dungeon and steal money and valuables, seeking revenge for her imprisonment in the main game. And the fact this whole pack is based around fucking over the Riddler is extremely valid and worthwhile just for that. It's nothing special and suffers from something all of these packs suffer from, and that's brevity. It just isn't given enough time for anything to really stop and sort of smell the roses and expand. Each of these packs as a standalone story are disappointing. Put them together and they're even more disappointing. Now, do I hate them? No. I actually like their inclusion. The concept of standalone story packs is fun, and although I could only fathom to make a full video about 2 of them, as a group, they do a good job at expanding the lore of the Arkham universe in a playable medium, which is nice to see because these could have very easily been put down to character bio lines or Gotham City stories, so it's nice to actually get to play through the stories despite their lack of substance. I don't hate any of them, but equally I don't love them. I think it's better if you look at them as an added bonus for being able to play as these characters in challenge maps to create sort of the definitive Arkham game, but if you look at them in the other way around and see the stories as being the main selling point, I think you'll be quite disappointed. I do like the idea of them, and if they were all given more time to breathe and be allowed to exist in their own right and just expand on the ideas they present, they could have been great, and that's why Matter of Family is great. It puts you in this story and keeps you there long enough to care about the end result, while building upon established Arkham lore, giving great hidden details which are imperative to an Arkham expansion, while giving us a great and replayable story. Whereas the 4 stories and the Robin expansion we've spoken about before all feel like they could have either been left on the cutting room floor with the characters being sold separately to be used in challenge maps, or just been built upon and left to cook a bit longer. Because I imagine the market for new and expanded Arkham content is huge, especially now in the age of Suicide Squad and VR games which are largely inaccessible unless you're willing to drop the money to buy the console if you don't have it. Not that I have anything against Arkham Shadow, by the way, it looks great and the story genuinely is up there as one of the better Arkham stories, but it would have been nice to have 6 extra decently sized expansions to the last real console Arkham game that isn't Suicide Squad. It's a shame, it really is. I guess you can say the same about these packs, as you can about Arkham Knight as a game. It had so much potential and so many great concepts, and so many stories to tell, but ultimately, whether it was due to budgetary constraints, time, or just laziness, it just never quite got where it could have been. In case you're wondering on how I'd rank them, that being with Matter of Family at the top by default, I'd say Flip of a Coin at 1, GCPD Lockdown 2, Harley's Pack 3, and then Red Hood's 4, and then Catwoman's 5, because it's just annoying. Not that my opinion holds any weight, and these rankings are subject to change if I'm being honest. There's very little splitting everything here, but I think the big takeaway from this video is that there was so much room to build upon the Arkham universe, and it was built upon very lightly. They're fun for one playthrough, and that's about it. A solid 6 out of 10 overall. I never really go back to them, and I have to admit, until recording for this video, I hadn't played any of them in years. Like, a lot of the things in them I'd forgotten, or just completely erased from my memory, and I think that speaks to their quality that, despite the fact they were extra Arkham content, I just never went back to them like you do with Harley Quinn's Revenge, or the Catwoman in Batman Arkham City, or Cold Cold Heart. They just don't have enough substance. Nothing too genuinely awful or bad, but nothing outstanding or game-changing. But what about that time Batman Arkham Knight actually did make great DLC? Well, that's where A Matter of Family comes in. Clocking in at about half an hour, this is easily the best DLC in Arkham Knight, and stands up there with some of the best DLC in the Arkham franchise in general. It's really good, and so, let's talk about it. A matter of family begins between the events of Arkham Origins and Asylum and follows the events of Jim Gordon's kidnapping, along with a handful of GCPD officers who are taken to the Seagate amusement park, an abandoned amusement park with a haunting past which we'll talk about later. We begin the story as Batgirl, and she enters the park taking down some thugs and meets Robin at the front gate. Batgirl tells Robin that they can't call Batman for backup because Joker clearly stated that if Batman was spotted, Joker would kill Gordon and the cops. The pair begin making their way up the line to the main amusement park, taking down a handful of thugs as they go, and it's here we're introduced to one of the main gameplay elements in this story, hacking. Batgirl can use the cryptographic sequencer, much like Batman in the main game, to set up environmental hazards, traps, and distractions. However, I do have a bit of an issue with Knight's hacking. See, for some reason, Arkham Knight's hacking just feels off. I can't quite pinpoint it why, but it's not nearly as precise as City's. It feels smoother, but nowhere near as responsive, and I don't know if that even makes sense, but I can't really put into words how this makes me feel. I sometimes feel as if the word I want is right there, but one letter won't line up, and whereas in City you could make a slight adjustment to find the letter, in Night it feels like the whole word will move, or just completely on the contrary, it won't move, and you end up stuck in this constant cycle of looking at the same half-completed word. Aside from this small gripe though, Barbara's main gimmick, and something this entire DLC rests pretty heavily on, is her ability to hack different things around the park and scare enemies, or take them out using the sequencer. And honestly, this works really well. It leans into Barbara's more technological side and her intellect, and it's a fun change from the norm, bringing more preparation and thought into what could have been an otherwise pretty standard DLC story. We get up to the main park and Robin goes to find bombs scattered around the park, while Batgirl heads off to find 3 sets of hostages around it, using the remote Batarang's voice isolation to find where they are. The 3 sections where we have to rescue the hostages are great, each being unique enough to remain fun but familiar enough to remain playable without being overbearing. First, we headed off to the carousel in this playthrough, a really cool combat section where Batgirl has to take out a large group of thugs while 3 officers are slowly drowned in a giant fish tank. It's worth mentioning here that this DLC has a very limited enemy pool when compared to the main game, having only medics and the dynamically changing weapon-wielding enemies, and this makes this one of the easiest story packs, because for the most part, if you don't want to, you don't need to worry about switching up your combo or using different gadgets in combat, being able to just take the enemies down with your standard moves, and this can make for a pretty derivative experience from time to time, but luckily, coming in at about 35 minutes on a normal playthrough, the lack of enemy variety doesn't get old enough quick enough to feel boring to fight, but when you notice the lack of variety, it is a little bit annoying. Anyway, we rescue the cops using the explosive gel and head back out into the park. Robin tells us of a bomb, and so that's the next step and our next feature, Dual Team Combat. We get one section of this before this bomb, but this seems timely to talk about it. The dual team combat is so cool in this section. It's the first and only time we see the future Mr. and Mrs. Gordon Drake team up in combat, and although it's a little generic with not many unique voice lines or takedowns, it's a cool combo to get to play as, and as a bonus, both characters are pretty fun to play as. Batgirl is my preference, her animations and takedowns are really cool, and I think she just feels good to play as, whereas some characters can feel pretty meh. Harley Quinn, I'm looking at you, but Batgirl strikes the fine line of familiar and unique, which makes for a really fun character to play as, and experience throughout the DLC. We disarm the bomb and head back out into the park, this time for our next batch of hostages. This time in the bowels of the park. Heading through this park though is so eerie, something backed up by its origin story. A story which has all the hallmarks of a Joker and Harley special. Death, manipulation, and a sprinkle of self-game ending. The park began life as a project by oil baron Edward Burke, and was built under the advice of his close friend Harleen Quinzel, for his ill daughter Katie. After showing Harleen some drawings done by Katie, Edward was introduced to a close associate of hers, Jack White. And for those of you paying attention back in the Asylum, this is one of Joker's oldest aliases, and he assisted in the creation of the park. Joker would refer Katie to Dr. Penelope Young, and she would begin treating her with Titan, trying to increase her resistance to her illness. And he also, by no ill means, convinced, fully legally, some health and safety inspectors to open the park despite the hundreds of clear safety violations. Once the park was completed and ready to be opened, Joker had Katie killed with a Titan overdose, leaving Edward distraught and on the edge of committing permanent game end. Given he felt he had nothing to live for, losing his daughter and not getting to show her a park, Edward decided he wanted to go back to the lobby, so to speak, and was assisted by Harleen and Jack, who... Sorry, I can't... Edward decided he wanted to go back to the lobby. Where was I again? Harleen and Jack would give some pills to end it painlessly, something he'd come to find out wasn't true though, as when Edward took the pills he'd find out they were laced with Smilex, and Edward would quite literally laugh himself to death, suffering a horrible, slow and painful death as Joker and Harley took the park over, giving it their own homely look. The park is genuinely horrifying, and I think this backstory gives it an edge. There's something sinister, clearly, about turning a little girl's world into a permanent reminder of what could have been and the happiness lost, replaced with the Joker's twisted play on the word. When Batgirl reaches the next hostages, a giant stealth section awaits at the Ghost Ship attraction. This section is quite easy despite the number of enemies, there being 13 of them in total. Batgirl slowly picks them apart using the attractions to her advantage and picking them off one by one, and eventually she takes them all out, freeing the next group of hostages. But Robin finds another bomb, so we race across the park to find it and disarm it, this time in an even bigger combat encounter which does get a little cramped, but the Bat Babies manage it and take them out. Speaking of babies, there's a really interesting comment Joker makes to Batgirl early in this DLC about how Batman's been distracted by his two new proteges and believes it's what they call baby brain, and the best way to deal with baby brain is to get rid of the babies. This is quite an interesting comment to make considering how he came into possession of the park, and it's just something I thought would know. I don't think it means anything other than that, but yeah, it was just something I discovered and thought, oh, that's quite interesting. Alas, we need to rescue the final hostages, this time on a Ferris wheel from hell. No, not a crappy ride at Disney World themed around some movie no one's ever heard of, quite literally a spinning wheel of death. After taking down the first wave of enemies, Harley sends some more in, and the wheel speeds up, sending the cops trapped inside on a journey they'll never forget. But after taking down Harley's second wave of thugs, we slow down the ride and rescue them. But one hostage remains, Commissioner Gordon. Robin finds Joker and Harley, and so we meet him there, ready to take the dastardly duo down. This fight is really cool, generic in terms of difficulty, but definitely cool. It's actually a full-on combat boss between Robin, Batgirl, Harley and Joker. It's pretty unique. It doesn't do much in terms of mixing the combat up, both of them being able to be taken down with normal takedowns and whatnot, but we do get these cool scripted sequences with Joker requiring two of the Bat's wards to tackle. The fight carries on and ends up with the Bat and the Bird winning, rescuing Gordon but not before the SWAT bust in and Joker takes Quinn hostage, using her as a meat shield before making his grand escape down into the city, using a parachute to fly away with the wind as Quinn screams for her Mr. J to escape. When Quinn's taken away and the dust settles, Gordon thanks Robin and his daughter as she tries to hide her face from her. Surely though, even under the mask he could see it was Barbara straight away, but he doesn't. And this is where our story ends. After the story ends though, we can head back out into the haunting park, breaking Destructibles and Joker teeth for no other reason than satisfaction. The park's also riddled with Easter eggs, stories and otherworldly stars, but A Matter of Family is a great DLC. A great world-building story which is made all the more emotional given the bookending of tragedy that surrounds the story. The first being the manipulation and untimely death of the Burkes and Jack White's unorthodox property acquisition, and the second being Barbara's loss of spine and her untimely and sudden end to crime fighting. Something we can see here she has a knack for and a love for. A Matter of Family might not be perfect, but it's an unnerving story surrounding it, the great story within the game and haunting setting, all come together to create what I think is Batman Arkham Knight's best DLC. And at very least, it's a damn sight better than the character packs that we got alongside it. And with that, we reach the end. All of Arkham Knight's content covered, ranked, rated and spoken about. But this isn't the end of the channel. See, I had initially decided that after the Arkham Knight content was over, I would move on to pastures new. Different games, different worlds, new heroes, new stories. But I'm not sure about that. I think we might just stick around with Batman just a bit longer. We've got an Arkham City retrospective coming out soon, and then after that we'll see. You guys seem to love the Batman content, and I love Batman more than anything in the world. So, if you're here for it, I'm here for it. So again, stick around, like, subscribe. Thank you for the last few months on this channel. It's been amazing. And this kind of acts as a full stop on the Arkham Knight content because I can't really cover anything else on it. Maybe aside from the challenge maps, I might do that one day. But again, thank you so much for watching, enjoying, subscribing, commenting, liking. It's been great and I can't wait to see you all next time. So, thank you for watching. Goodbye.
This is how it happened. This is how the Batman died.
Only you can make this world seem right. Only you can make the darkness bright.